The kingdom of Azul erupts in celebration as news spreads that the hero and the four sages have successfully subjugated the Demon King. Amidst the jubilant atmosphere, one man stands apart, sweat pouring down his face as he is gripped by an overwhelming sense of dread. Born as a lowly noble, he feels a shiver down his spine as he stands surrounded by world leaders and extravagant luxury that feels entirely alien to him. The crowd roars with magnificent praise, welcoming the team home with thunderous cheers of admiration. The king raises his hand to silence the masses, declaring that they have done well in aiding the hero to defeat the Demon King. The four great heroes kneel respectfully before the throne as their monarch addresses them. The sages of fire, earth, wind, and water bow their heads, awaiting their ruler's command. In recognition of their bravery, the king bestows upon them a title befitting the greatest sorcerers, crowning them the four emperors. Ethel is struck with sheer terror as the weight of the title, for emperors, crashes down upon him. He realizes with horror that this title is reserved strictly for those of noble blood, making him an impostor in this world of high status. Yet their success in subjugating the Demon King is undeniable, forcing the kingdom to recognize their power. Within the strict confines of the magical world, they are permitted to wield the title of emperor despite their origins. The Sage of Fire gratefully accepts the title of Emperor of Blaze as a reward for their unorthodox victory. The king's voice cuts through the ceremony as he specifically calls upon Sage Ethel. Although he ranks slightly behind the others in magical terms, the king grants him permission to take the title of Emperor as well. A heavy, jeweled crown is brought forth, symbolizing a burden far greater than simple gold. Ethel stares wide-eyed at the crown, his face a mask of shock and apprehension. The king commands him to call himself the Emperor of Thunder as he places the crown upon his head. Ethel lowers his gaze, resigning himself to the heavy fate that has just been placed upon him. As the hall erupts in applause for the newly formed four emperors, Ethel is overwhelmed by the generous words and the crushing pressure. The chant for eternal life to the four emperors echoes repeatedly through the chamber, sealing his destiny. After 40 years of living with magic, he realizes he has finally been recognized with the highest status imaginable. 15 years later, a voice calls out to Ethel-sama, breaking the silence of the wilderness. An older, bearded Ethel pauses and turns his head, his attention caught by the interruption. He dismisses his apprentices to go have fun while he stays behind to survey the demonic weeds a little longer. Suddenly, a violent cough racks his body, splattering blood across the pages of his open grimoire. He collapses to his knees in agony, clutching his chest as his strength fails him. He stares at his own hand, watching as it trembles and stains dark with the blood he just coughed up. Gasping for air, he curses his illness and accepts the grim reality that he does not have much time left. A female elf approaches him with concern, calling out his name as he struggles on the ground. He is surprised to see Merlin still there, while she questions why he continues to train his magic despite being so sick. She admonishes him to be more conscious of his body, and he admits she is right. Ethel looks at Merlin with a solemn intensity, his mind drifting away from the present moment. In a flashback to the collapsing Demon King's castle, a voice urges him to hurry and escape the destruction. Amidst the falling rubble and chaos, Ethel spots something on the ground that stops him in his tracks. A crying infant lies in the arms of a deceased woman, wailing amidst the ruins of the battle. Ethel realizes with horror that a demon mother and her child were innocent victims dragged into their war. To his shock, the dying demon mother reaches out a trembling hand and addresses him as Sage. With her final breath, she begs him to save her child, entrusting the infant's life to him. Ethel snatches up the bundled child and sprints away from the collapsing castle, coughing blood as he makes his escape. Ethel stares at Merlin with a heavy heart, silently confessing that he is the man who killed her family, though she has no memory of it. He feels a pang of guilt as Merlin looks back at him with pure, worried eyes, oblivious to his dark secret. Ethel deflects the moment by claiming he trains her so she can teach future talented generations, causing the young elf to flush with embarrassment. He explains that this mentorship is why he originally aimed to become the strongest in the world, asking his pupils what they see when they look at his back. Merlin confirms that aspiring magical warriors naturally aim for the peak, but she is confused when Ethel speaks of his ambition in the past tense. Ethel admits with a sorrowful expression that he no longer sees any hope for himself reaching the zenith of magic. Merlin passionately retorts that the Emperor of Lightning is already the strongest in the world and doesn't need to prove anything more. As his students cheer for him, Ethel walks away with a self-deprecating laugh, muttering to himself that he is merely strong amongst the weak. His expression darkens as he reflects that while he shines here, he is nothing compared to the truly powerful mages of the world. He thinks of the other 3 emperors, who are young and possess immense, natural talent that completely overshadows his own. Ethel recalls that during the subjugation of the Demon King, he was the only one who had to fight desperately just to keep up because of his age. Suddenly, a student rushes toward him, gasping for breath and shouting that he has big news for Ethel-sama. The student reports that the Emperor of Blaze's university has developed a groundbreaking theory regarding demon magic compatibility. Ethel reads the report in shock, realizing that the long-standing mystery of distinguishing magic compatibility has finally been solved. He praises the Emperor of Blaze for the discovery, impressed that such a method has been established to identify magical aptitude. When the students ask what to do, Ethel enthusiastically suggests they give the test a shot immediately to see if it works. They set up the experiment with test tubes, and Ethel decides they should test Merlin first to gauge the accuracy. The students explain that they need to soak 1 hair in 4 special kinds of magical water, and Merlin winces as a hair is plucked. The students drop the hairs into the vials and watch intently as the reaction begins to bubble. A bright light erupts from the table, causing the students to cry out in awe as the magic reacts. They observe that the vials have shined blue and green, and Ethel notes that the rank is distinguished by the hue of the light. Ethel consults the research paper, confirming that blue and green illumination corresponds to high affinity for water and wind. He observes the red and brown vials, concluding that Merlin has C-rank fire and B-rank earth, while being S-rank in water and wind. Ethel isn't surprised since he raised her, but he is amazed that the test results align so perfectly with his years of observation. He declares the magic theory spot on, noting how it accurately maps Merlin's compatibility across fire, earth, water, and wind. Ethel realizes that while academies currently teach every kind of magic, this new method allows them to determine compatibilities immediately. He speculates that if a child's field of expertise were determined right after birth or upon entering an academy, the efficiency would skyrocket. He concludes that this targeted approach could allow mages to specialize early and get even stronger than before. Ethel nervously steps forward and asks the students to test him next, admitting he wants to verify his own aptitude. Merlin protests, insisting that there is no need for an examination since Ethel is already one of the legendary 4 emperors. Ethel brushes off the praise and insists they proceed, while his students eagerly prepare to see the results of their master. As the test begins, Ethel thinks that even if he can't reach the peak now, an intense color will surely appear to validate his status. He is desperate to know if he ever possessed the true quality of a mage to begin with. He reflects on how he worked several hundred times harder than the other gifted emperors just to stand on the same stage. Ethel's eyes widen in sheer horror as he looks at the results of the test. He stammers in shock as he realizes the liquid in the vials remains completely colorless. The 4 test tubes remain clear as water, indicating absolutely zero magical affinity whatsoever. The students are confused, asking why the liquid remains clear and questioning what clear even means in this context. Ethel sweats profusely as a student points out that it is odd, because colorless and transparent implies no compatibility at all. The student continues to reason that having no compatibility means receiving no divine protection from spirits, a seemingly impossible state for an emperor. Ethel rages against his limitations, shouting that he is the Emperor of Thunder while questioning his failures. In a desperate flashback, he and an assistant realize they might have messed up the process, prompting them to try again from the beginning. He stares blankly at the ceiling, lamenting that no matter how many times they tried, the desired result never appeared. 15 years later, Merlin arrives at a snowy cabin, her expression heavy with worry. She stands before a door marked, "Do not enter," calling out for Ethel with increasing urgency. Inside the cluttered cabin, an elderly Ethel lies in bed, his breathing ragged and labored. His vision blurs as he gasps for air, his life force rapidly fading away. In his final moments, he reflects on his peers, finally understanding the true gap between them. He realizes that no matter how much effort he put in, he could never catch up to the raw power of the other 3 emperors. Tears stream down his face as he admits the harsh truth that he simply had no compatibility with magic. He laments that he was walled off by a lack of talent, cast aside while others soared to the peak he aimed for. Biting his lip until it bleeds, he screams that it is miserable, believing that with just a little more time, he could have reached their level. Consumed by regret, he curses his fate, shouting about how truly vexing his weakness is. With one final, agonized scream, Ethel's life comes to an end in that lonely bed. Suddenly, a system interface materializes in the darkness, accompanied by mechanical clicking sounds. A message window pops up, activating a hidden ability, skill, reincarnation. Ethel wakes up in a white void, confused and dazed by the sudden transition. He realizes he had completely forgotten about the skill, noting that he was granted it over 50 years ago. He recognizes this white space as the place between worlds where he ended his previous life. A giant goddess greets him warmly, welcoming him back after such a long time. She praises his unyielding ambition, attributing his return to his specific skill, persistence. Ethel looks up in shock as the goddess acknowledges that he fought with everything he had until the very end. He strokes his chin, realizing that his refusal to give up on anything was the trigger for this specific outcome. The goddess announces that it is now time for his third reincarnation. She offers him a choice of 2 bonus starting skills to aid him in this new life. Ethel immediately refuses the handout, dismissing her offer of doubled growth rates or becoming the strongest instantly. He smirks, pointing out that he became an emperor without compatibility, relying solely on the vast knowledge now stored in his head. He declares that he doesn't need skills, as the power of his will and the time to put in effort are all he requires. The goddess accepts his decision, though she seems skeptical about his difficult path. Smiling serenely, she asks if he is ready to begin his journey once more. Ethel confirms his resolve, asking her to take care of the process. He stands alone in the vast white space as the goddess wishes him a wonderful trip. In a new world, a young boy stirs in his bed, groaning as he wakes up. He suddenly sits up, screaming as consciousness floods back into his mind. Clutching his head, he is overwhelmed as 50 years of memories come pouring back in all at once. He runs to a mirror, shocked by his reflection and momentarily confused about his identity. Clarity returns, and he realizes with certainty that he is Ethel. He understands that his memories are returning gradually now that his 4-year-old brain is developed enough to handle them. He recalls his specific request to the goddess to be reincarnated for another chance. Standing on a table, the young Ethel declares to the empty room that this time, he will surely become the strongest man in the generation. A newborn baby's gaze drifts downward, settling on the soft warmth of his mother's chest as he breathes his first breaths in a new life. Glass goblets filled with clear fluid sit ready on a table, prepared for the crucial compatibility examination liquid test. Excitement fills the room as the liquid is applied to the infant, with the adults praying that this generation will finally possess magical talent. The optimism shatters instantly as the liquid remains stubbornly colorless, confirming the child has no affinity for magic. The boy laments that he doesn't even possess the compatibility level of a commoner, though he tries to convince himself he doesn't need skills. Years pass, and the young boy climbs a grassy hill, having long ago accepted the reality of his magicless existence. Lying back on the grass, he reflects on his past life, worrying that if his growth limit is the same as before, he is doomed to mediocrity. He stares blankly at the sky, tormented by the fear that he will hit a hard limit once he learns merely level 10 magic. His brooding is interrupted as he notices a strange shape moving through the clouds above him. A massive, terrifying dragon soars through the sky, its scales glinting in the sunlight. The boy scrambles up in disbelief, shocked to see a legendary beast in such a remote area. He sprints after it, questioning if someone lured the enraged creature, noting its eyes are burning crimson with pure anger. Panic sets in as he realizes the dragon is on a direct path to a populated area, spelling certain catastrophe for the citizens. He skids to a halt, his mind racing as he tries to formulate a plan to stop the impending disaster. Realizing the beast is heading for the royal capital, he despairs that his 4-year-old body is powerless compared to his prime. Desperate, he attempts to channel the persona of Emperor of Thunder Ethel and cast the level 10 ultimate spell, hoping his past abilities remain. He raises his small hands to the sky, screaming as he forces mana to coalesce into a physical form. A gigantic, intricate magic circle manifests in the sky above him, shocking him with its sheer scale and complexity. He stares in bewilderment at his own hands and the spell he just invoked, unable to comprehend that it actually worked. The boy cries out in confusion, overwhelmed by the impossible power surging from his small frame. Bolts of lightning erupt from the magic circle, striking the dragon with devastating force and engulfing it in a blinding storm. The boy collapses onto the grass, panting heavily and trembling in disbelief that the spell actually managed to come out. As he catches his breath, a small movement in the grass catches his attention. He spots a small creature nearby and lets out a startled noise. Terrified, he screams as a slime monster lunges toward him. He shrieks in panic, flinching away as the slime monster prepares to attack. Suddenly, a pillar of energy erupts from the ground, obliterating the slime in an instant. The boy stares wide-eyed, gasping for air as smoke rises from the spot where the monster just was. Behind him, the charred remains of the massive dragon lie smoking on the ground, a testament to the power he just unleashed. He looks at his trembling hand, watching as arcs of residual lightning crackle between his fingers. He realizes that although he was reborn into this world at the age of 4, his soul is far older. Crucially, he understands that he has retained the overwhelming power he possessed in his heyday. 3 years later, his reincarnated mind has fully sprouted within his consciousness, and he sits at a desk surrounded by books. He reads intently, noting that despite his extensive research, there are strange discrepancies in this new life. He looks out the window, observing that this world is vastly different from the one he lived in before. A voice calls out from the door asking to come in, interrupting his study session. A well-dressed man enters, thanking the boy for welcoming him while the boy's mother greets the guest warmly. The man hands over an envelope containing their monthly allowance, telling the mother to take it. The mother accepts it with a smile, while the boy notes that she, like him, appears to have no compatibility and has suffered hardship. As the man leaves, the boy watches him with a cold gaze, noting that this provider of living expenses is not his father. Ethel introduces his visitor as Alcott Fraser, the second son of the dukedom and his beloved older brother, who warmly asks how he has been doing. The young boy reveals he was reborn into the family of one of his own descendants, watching a procession of mages from a distance. Ethel innocently asks where their father is, causing a flicker of discomfort to cross his brother's face. Fraser apologizes that Duke Alcott, the leader of the kingdom's order of sorcery, is too busy to visit, shielding the boy from the cold truth. Ethel notes in his heart that he has never once met his father. The Duke has a true wife and 9 concubines, living a life of excess and power. Ethel explains that his mother was an insignificant concubine with no magical compatibility, which led to their current predicament. He laments being an illegitimate child, wondering why a man of the Order of Sorcery's lineage would be with a woman devoid of magic. The Duke's true wife despised them and drove the mother and child away to a remote house far from the castle. However, Fraser, the legitimate son, couldn't stand their mistreatment and promises to speak to their father on their behalf. Fraser proves his kindness by looking after them and offering to check on their necessities, while Ethel's mother gratefully brews tea. They sit for tea regardless of their circumstances, though Ethel complains that his drink is too hot. Ethel reflects that he is content as long as he can study sorcery again in this new life. Fraser enjoys the tea's scent and asks his younger brother what path he intends to follow in the future. Ethel enthusiastically announces that once he turns 15, he plans to attend the Royal Capital's Academy of Sorcery since they share the blood of a great sage. Fraser spits out his tea in shock as Ethel excitedly lists his planned majors in compatibility and attribute enhancement studies. Fraser internally panics, knowing the sorcery compatibility examination invented by the Emperor of Blaze has proven Ethel has no magical compatibility. Desperate to protect his brother from failure, Fraser resolves to steer Ethel towards swordsmanship and eventually send him to a military academy. Fraser recovers from his shock with a forced smile, remembering his own path. He boasts that he graduated from a military academy with top grades despite his appearance, trying to sell the idea to Ethel. Fraser recounts how he chose the military academy to oppose their father and the sage lineage when he was young. He claims he is now prized as a rare, magical swordsman, and insists he made the right choice in the end. Seizing the moment, Fraser offers to mentor Ethel in swordsmanship right now since he has free time. Ethel agrees with a determined look, asking his brother to please teach him. Under the open sky, Fraser instructs the boy to place more emphasis on his grip. They spar with wooden swords, and Fraser loudly encourages Ethel, telling him he is doing great. Fraser compliments Ethel's aptitude for the blade, looking visibly relieved that the boy seems suited for it. Ethel realizes that Fraser has only ever educated him in military strategy, purposefully avoiding magic. He understands that his brother has been planning to send him to a military academy from the very beginning. Fraser hesitates, trying to explain the flow of swordsmanship, but Ethel cuts him off by dropping his stance. Fraser asks if he is tired, but Ethel looks up with tears in his eyes and shouts for his big brother. Ethel firmly declares that he wants to attend the Academy of Sorcery, refusing the military path. Fraser kneels down to level with him, his expression serious. He insists that he realizes Ethel's desire, but gently warns that there are things humans simply aren't suited for. Ethel internally counters that he has a clue on how to surpass sorcery's limits and wants to investigate the Academy's 400 years later. Fraser proposes a deal. If Ethel can reproduce the spell he is about to demonstrate, he will personally refer him to the Academy. Ethel asks if he really means it, and Fraser confirms he will write the referral if the condition is met. Ethel cheers in triumph, shouting, "Woo!" at the chance to prove himself. Fraser looks at him with pity, thinking it cruel because he believes Ethel will understand his lack of talent once he sees real magic. Ethel watches eagerly as Fraser prepares to cast the spell, telling him to observe carefully. Fraser charges forward with a roar, gathering his resolve to demonstrate his magical prowess to Ethel. He begins the incantation, calling upon the spirit of wind, Sylphid, to grant him its blessing. With sweat rolling down his face, he completes the chant, demanding the spirit provide the breath of the gods and its strength. Fraser unleashes a level 2 sorcery called Wind Edge, firing a blade of compressed air at the target. The invisible blade slices through the air, creating a turbulent vortex as it flies toward a large tree. The impact is direct, shaking the massive tree to its core as the wind magic bites into the trunk. The tree collapses with a heavy crash, prompting Fraser to turn back and ask Ethel how the display was. Fraser breathes heavily, proudly declaring that such a creation can only be described as a miracle. He laughs and boasts that this caliber of sorcery is all that is required, but Ethel steps forward and simply says, "Me." Without a single word of chanting, Ethel instantaneously conjures a massive magical circle, shocking Fraser to his core. A colossal wave of wind magic erupts from Ethel, completely obliterating the line of trees in front of him. Fraser shields his face with his arms, barely able to withstand the sheer wind pressure generated by the blast. Ethel stands calmly amidst the destruction while Fraser stares at him, jaw dropped in utter disbelief. Cold sweat pours down Fraser's face as he struggles to comprehend how a 7-year-old cast a spell instantaneously without chanting. He reasons that such a feat should be impossible, attainable only by sages who have accumulated decades of training. Trembling, Fraser points a finger at Ethel, stammering his name and demanding to know what just happened. Ethel realizes he messed up, internally noting that he intended to reproduce Fraser's spell but accidentally used level 4 strength instead. He innocently asks if level 4 is low ranking, causing Fraser to scream that it is actually an extremely high-ranking sorcery. Ethel panics internally, realizing he can't explain that he was reborn, while Fraser continues to shriek in confusion. Trying to bluff, Ethel claims he is cultivating his cerebellum to familiarize himself with the spells he has studied. He casually adds that if he were in normal condition, he could probably go up to level 10. Fraser's face contorts in horror as he stammers out the word, level 10, his mind unable to process the concept. His soul appears to leave his body as he mutters that such power is a lost art. Fraser collapses to the ground in a dead faint, ignoring Ethel's concerned cries of "Big Brother." Ethel stops his act, his expression turning serious as he realizes Fraser's reaction indicates something is wrong with this era's magic. He recalls the burnt corpse of a dragon from his past, noting the similarity in destruction, and begins to piece together the truth. Sitting in his library later, Ethel concludes that he doesn't know exactly what happened during the 400-year gap. He writes in his journal, determining that the level of magic in this world has declined rapidly compared to his previous life. He reviews a mental chart confirming the disparity. What was once level 1 everyday sorcery is now considered low class, and his level 4 spell is now super high class. He realizes that basic concepts like widespread magic use and chanting-less casting are now considered lost technologies or miracles. Ethel sighs, understanding that casting level 4 magic without chanting or compatibility makes him look like a monster in this era. He looks over at the bed where Fraser is still unconscious, realizing that his overwhelming display is exactly why his brother fainted. Guilt washes over him as he watches Fraser sleep, admitting to himself that he did something bad by scaring him so much. Fraser suddenly bolts upright in bed, screaming Ethel's name in a panic. He grabs Ethel and shakes him, frantically shouting about a 7-year-old using sorcery without chanting. Ethel quickly fabricates a lie, claiming that Fraser's great sorcery sent wood flying, which hit him on the head and knocked him out. Fraser immediately accepts this explanation, laughing in relief that his own power was the cause. Ethel uses the moment to add that he took the opportunity to secretly practice spells, providing a plausible cover for his abilities. The two begin training together, clashing wooden swords as Ethel integrates himself into Fraser's routine. Ethel decides to continue working with Fraser for the time being, using him as a stepping stone to eventually enter a military academy. Fraser encourages Ethel to keep slashing as quick as lightning, urging the young boy to push his limits during their sparring session. With a casual swing, Fraser deflects the attack and sends Ethel flying through the air, his strength overwhelmingly superior. Ethel crashes hard onto the ground, his wooden sword spinning away as he grimaces in pain from the impact. He complains that he went too far and reminds his brother that he has no desire to attend a military academy. Gritting his teeth, Ethel realizes his personality has been influenced by the persistent skill carried over from his former life. Fraser praises his fighting spirit, fueling Ethel's determination to keep going despite the repeated defeats. Day after day, Ethel charges in screaming, once more, only to be knocked back time and again by his relentless brother. Through this grueling routine, years pass until he reaches the age of 10, standing solemnly atop a high rock. A fierce determination burns in his eyes as he focuses his mind and body for a strike. With a blinding flash of speed, he unleashes a strike that shatters the target in front of him with explosive force. The impact sends debris flying as the sheer power of the blow resonates through the training ground. He leaps through the air with agility, executing a complex series of aerial maneuvers to test his limits. In mid-air, he slashes through a thick log with surgical precision, severing it cleanly in a single motion. He lands gracefully on a rock surrounded by a waterfall, the spray misting around him as he sheathes his blade. He reflects that while he wants to transcend sorcery as a blade, becoming the strongest mage knight wouldn't be so bad either. Fraser's voice interrupts his thoughts, calling out his name and surprising him in the middle of his solitude. Ethel greets his big brother, asking with enthusiasm if they are about to begin today's training session. Fraser grins and informs him that today will be special because the procedure is going to be a bit different. He announces that he has called a special coach for Ethel, signaling a shift from their usual one-on-one routine. A massive man steps forward, introduced as Moria, the former commander of the Azul Order of Chivalry. Moria towers over the young boy, telling him to come at him freely, his presence alone radiating immense pressure. The commander raises a hand and warns Ethel to prepare himself, as he intends to practice directly with him. Fraser cheers from the sidelines for Ethel to do his best, while the boy hesitates, unsure how to attack freely. Ethel analyzes his opponent, realizing with dread that the man is incredibly strong and has absolutely no openings. Moria taunts him, asking if he plans to just stand there despite having come all this way. Ethel trembles, paralyzed by fear and the realization that his body refuses to move against such a foe. Seeing the hesitation, Moria declares that he will take the initiative and lunges forward to attack. A shockwave erupts as Moria unleashes a devastating strike, forcing Ethel to react purely on instinct. Ethel is shocked to realize he couldn't see the slash at all, overwhelmed by the commander's blinding speed. Moria scoffs that his reaction is too slow and asks mockingly if that is all the boy can do. Pushed to the brink, Ethel activates strengthened physical ability, stunning Moria with his ability to manipulate mana. Sparks fly as Ethel clashes with the commander, his speed and power drastically enhanced by the magical boost. The force of the collision sends Ethel flying back, screaming as he struggles to withstand the heavy blow. Moria smiles, admitting he can finally see why Fraser endorsed the boy, acknowledging the skill behind the magic. Fraser reveals that he had noticed a slight magical power dwelling in Ethel's arms during their sword training. In a flashback, Fraser asks Ethel directly if he is able to manipulate magical power. He explains excitedly that there are ways to boost physical abilities instantly if one can manipulate that power. Fraser instructs him to concentrate the magic into one area, noting that lack of compatibility doesn't mean lack of power. He watches in amazement as Ethel performs the feat smoothly, likening his control to that of an expert sage. Back in the present, Ethel wipes his mouth and grins, thinking that his expertise is natural because he used to be a sage. The burly opponent gasps in disbelief, questioning how a boy with absolutely no magical compatibility can handle power like such an expert. Ethel grips his wooden sword, thinking that winning would be a piece of cake if he used his hidden magic, but he immediately dismisses the thought. He decides that relying on his past powers to defeat this man would be completely meaningless. Determined to prove his worth in this new life, he resolves to win solely with the sword. Ethel launches himself forward with a fierce battle cry, closing the distance between them in an instant. The two combatants clash, their wooden training swords impacting with a heavy thud as sparks of friction fly. The large man easily blocks the strike, sneering that Ethel's efforts are entirely useless against his defense. He pushes back with overwhelming force, sending Ethel sliding across the dirt as the boy struggles to maintain his footing. The man taunts Ethel, criticizing his lack of height, muscle, and technique as he bears down on him. He laughs that the boy is 3 years too early to face him head-on, pressing his advantage with brute strength. Suddenly, Ethel shifts his weight and accelerates, his sword blurring as he executes a rapid maneuver. The large man's eyes widen in shock as he loses track of the boy's movement for a split second. Ethel slips inside the man's guard, moving too fast for him to react. Using the man's own momentum against him, Ethel grabs his arm and executes a perfect throw, launching the giant into the air. The world spins for the opponent as he plummets toward the ground, unable to stop his fall. He crashes into the dirt with a massive impact, lying flat on his back in total defeat. Ethel pumps his fists in victory, shouting, while his opponent stares up at the sky in stunned silence. Ethel looks down at his own hands in surprise, realizing his body responded automatically without conscious thought. He recognizes the technique instantly, realizing his muscles remembered the grappling moves he learned in his previous life. A flashback reveals his past self competing in a judo match in another world, surrounded by cheering crowds. Ethel smiles to himself, amused that skills from a non-magical world would prove so useful in a place like this. The large man sits up and bursts into laughter, amazed that a 10-year-old kid could pull off such a grappling move. He remarks that he heard the Orient still uses such techniques, visibly impressed by Ethel's skill. The man loudly declares, "I lost," and tells Ethel that he has officially passed the test. Ethel wipes the sweat from his face and turns to his brother, confused by the mention of a test. Fraser suddenly remembers he forgot to mention the most important detail about their guest. He introduces the large man as Headmaster Moria of the glorious kingdom of Azul Military Academy. Ethel freezes, his eyes widening as the implication of that title sinks in. Moria declares that while Ethel won the duel, he won the war, and Ethel will be enrolled in the military academy at age 15. Ethel screams in protest, demanding to know what kind of twisted reasoning leads to that conclusion. Later, storm clouds gather overhead as a servant urges Ethel's mother to hurry inside before the rain starts. She smiles gently, watching her son from afar, saying she doesn't mind the weather as long as Ethel doesn't get wet. The scene focuses on the intertwining fates of Ethel, the girl Merlin, and the path he is now forced to walk. Deep in the woods, alone under the darkening sky, Ethel stands revealed as the level 10 Emperor of Thunder. He casts a complex magic circle, his eyes glowing with power he is supposed to lack. A massive bolt of lightning blasts down from the heavens, obliterating a tree in a blinding pillar of light. Ethel analyzes the result, noting there is still a slight delay when he unleashes high-level magic like level 9 or 10. He grins, realizing that this stormy weather is the perfect cover to practice his magic without anyone noticing. Fraser rushes into the clearing, screaming Ethel's name in panic after seeing the lightning strike. Ethel quickly strikes a casual pose, feigning innocence and assuring his terrified brother that he is perfectly fine despite the thunderbolt. Fraser nervously asks if they have an understanding, relieved when Ethel agrees to keep their secret regarding the magic incident. He warns Ethel to be careful so he doesn't get hurt before enrolling in the military academy next year. Ethel reflects that his enrollment was decided long ago, though his internal plans differ significantly from the official path set for him. In this world, noble sons are treated as adults at 15 and are expected to leave home for a period of independence. Ethel determines that once he turns 15, he will leave home to pursue his true goal regardless of the expectations placed upon him. Realizing the military academy is a dead end for his magical ambitions, he resolves to enter an academy of sorcery on his own. Later, Fraser approaches Ethel with a bright smile, announcing that he has good news for him regarding his future. Ethel is stunned to learn that his father, Duke Alcott, has explicitly requested a meeting with him. His mother covers her mouth in shock, murmuring the Duke's name in disbelief as the reality of the summons sinks in. She tearfully attributes this opportunity to Fraser's diligent teaching of military science and swordsmanship. Overcome with emotion, she tackles Ethel in a tight hug, praising him for being amazing and making the family proud. Tears stream down her face as she rubs her cheek against his, proud that his father is finally acknowledging him. Ethel feels awkward about meeting a father who hasn't visited in 14 years, but he accepts the situation for his mother's sake. Fraser wipes away his own tears, laughing as he admits that even he is crying over this joyous development. His mother teases him, noting that his emotional reaction is natural since he has watched over Ethel every single day. Looking at their happy faces, Ethel resolves not to disappoint these two people who care for him so deeply. The group arrives at the imposing Alcott estate, the home of the Kingdom of Azul's prestigious duke. Ethel thinks that meeting his own descendant might be interesting, while Fraser looks visibly nervous about the encounter. They enter the grand hall, where Fraser formally presents Ethel to his father. Duke Alcott sits casually on a sofa, looking bored and unimpressed as his son enters the room. Standing beside him is the eldest son, Joachim, who observes the arrival with a stern, unreadable expression. Joachim steps forward silently, his imposing physical presence adding tension to the already heavy atmosphere. Ethel bows respectfully, stating his name and expressing his hope to finally meet his father. The room falls into a heavy silence as the Duke stares at Ethel without moving a muscle. The Duke's expression hardens as he demands Ethel address him formally as His Excellency, Duke Alcott. He coldly dismisses Ethel as a disgrace and merely an illegitimate child, refusing to acknowledge him as a true son. Ethel corrects his address through gritted teeth, internally fuming at being disowned by his own descendant. The Duke mocks Ethel's lack of magic compatibility, claiming it shames the lineage of the Emperor of Thunder. He theatrically declares that the founder must be crying to see such a failure in his bloodline. Ethel stares back blankly, thinking that he is indeed crying, but only because his descendant is such an unpleasant person. The Duke confirms with a sneer that Ethel is enrolling in the military academy on a swordsmanship scholarship. He suddenly bursts into loud laughter, exclaiming that this is absolutely wonderful news. Ethel briefly wonders if the Duke might actually care about him as a father despite the harsh words he just spoke. The Duke shatters that hope by shouting that he can finally stop paying bloody child support. Ethel stands frozen in shock as the Duke's true motivation for the meeting is revealed. The Duke rants joyfully about saving money, noting that the scholarship and military salary will cover all of Ethel's costs. Ethel mentally retracts any positive thoughts, categorizing the Duke as an absolute scumbag as he listens to the warning about the family name. The Duke turns his head, calling out lazily to his eldest son Joachim. He points a finger at Ethel, acknowledging that despite being illegitimate, the boy is still technically family. With a cruel expression, the Duke orders Joachim to test Ethel and confirm if he has the power to avoid embarrassing them. Joachim accepts the challenge with a twisted grin, relishing the opportunity to discipline what he considers a mere dog. Ethel stares back with intense focus, realizing that this confrontation addresses the core issue between them. The courtyard stands empty and waiting, a silent stage prepared for the impending duel. Ethel confirms he understands the gravity of the situation, his face set in a mask of determination. A voice warns Ethel that despite appearances, his older brother Joachim achieved extraordinary grades in swordsmanship during his school days. The warning continues, describing the 15-year-old Joachim as quite the master who has left a trail of defeated opponents in his wake. Ethel realizes with a shock that Joachim must have been going easy on him in the past, while the advisor notes Joachim won't show mercy to a minor. As Ethel wonders why his brother hates them so much, he is advised to surrender quickly if the pain becomes impossible to bear. Joachim laughs mockingly from across the arena, sneering that the boy should have just scurried back home while he had the chance. The older brother maintains a smug, condescending smirk, confident in his superiority. With a dismissive gesture, Joachim tosses a weapon toward Ethel, signaling for him to catch it. Ethel catches the weapon and is immediately startled to find that the wooden sword is unnaturally hard and heavy. Joachim explains with a cruel smile that it is a hardwood sword designed to break bones and cave in skulls if swung with full strength. He abruptly shifts to insults, screaming that idiocy runs in the family, confusing Ethel with the sudden outburst. Ethel's expression hardens into a glare as he silently processes the abuse thrown his way. Joachim haughtily introduces himself as the eldest son of the head family, declaring he will personally educate the mother and son idiot duet. He launches into a vicious tirade, claiming Ethel's mother begged the father in tears to forcefully give birth to a brat. He describes her as a sow with zero magic compatibility, disparaging her worth to the family. Looming over the smaller boy, he condemns Ethel as a bastard who shares the same lack of magical affinity. Joachim seethes with rage, admitting that he wants to kill the mother for the disgrace she brought to their lineage. However, he states he is willing to hold himself back for now and settle the score with Ethel instead. He turns his back on the boy, calling him a stinking brat and commanding him to start the fight. Standing arrogantly with his sword raised, Joachim offers a handicap, deeming a punk like Ethel beneath his full effort. He taunts Ethel for hesitating, asking if he got cold feet, while Ethel stares in disbelief at the man who is supposed to be his descendant. Joachim makes a grotesque comment about making love to Ethel just like the mother did to the father, reveling in his own vulgarity. Ethel stands frozen, his mind reeling at the realization that someone like this shares his bloodline. The thought that this man is his descendant fills him with a profound sense of disbelief and disgust. Ethel launches an attack, shocked to find that Joachim can barely react even though Ethel isn't using any magical enhancement. He realizes instantly that the stories of Joachim being a sword master were nothing but lies put on airs. The two clash, swords locking in a shower of sparks as Joachim frantically tries to defend himself. Joachim screams in panic, activating strengthened physical ability just to stop the boy's strike, boasting that he blocked it. Ethel presses the attack, his blade grinding against Joachim's as he overwhelms the older fighter with pure skill. Joachim's eyes bulge in terror as he struggles to comprehend how he is being overpowered by a mere brat. With a deafening crack, Ethel's weapon smashes through defenses, the impact rattling Joachim to his very bones. Joachim is launched high into the air, spinning uncontrollably from the sheer force of the blow. Ethel follows through with his swing as Joachim slams brutally onto the courtyard floor, kicking up a cloud of dust. The spectators watch in stunned silence, their jaws dropped at the impossible sight of the child defeating the master. Joachim tumbles violently across the ground, defeated and broken by a single decisive counterattack. Ethel stands over the fallen bully, coldly warning him never to insult his mother again. Joachim yells after him, furious that Ethel is walking away after humiliating him, but the boy ignores the outbursts. Ethel glares with terrifying intensity, threatening to kill his opponent if he does not understand the situation. The bald man screams in sheer terror, completely overwhelmed by the threat looming over him. Collapsed on the ground, the man wonders how a mere brat can make a face that embodies the true horror of life-or-death combat. Equipment lies scattered on the ground, discarded in the wake of the brief and decisive conflict. Ethel abruptly shifts gears, telling his mother that the ordeal is over and suggesting they simply go home. His mother looks at him with sweat on her brow, hesitantly asking if he has truly returned to being the normal Ethel. He beams with a bright, innocent smile, confirming that he is indeed back to his normal self. Gently, he reaches out to take her hand in a warm gesture of comfort and reassurance. Mother and son walk away together, her anxiety fading as she agrees to go home with him. Back at their estate, Ethel cheerfully greets his father, who sits slumped and sweating on a garden bench. The father awkwardly excuses himself, offering excessive gratitude for their invitation while trying to escape the situation. As the Duke remains seated in stunned silence, Ethel and his mother bow dutifully and affirm his dismissal. Walking through the quiet night streets, Ethel offers an awkward apology to his mother for the earlier trouble. He stares at his father, lamenting that after 4 centuries, his descendants have become pathetic people who leave him speechless. His mother giggles at his serious tone, calling him a strange child for apologizing like a parent. Ethel laughs off the comment while thinking that, in a way, he actually is a parent to this lineage. As they head back, Ethel reflects on the irony that the first target of his full magic in this new life was the army led by his own family. A few days later, the scene shifts to the fortified walls and sprawling buildings of the Kingdom of Azul. A command roars out to open the gates, signaling the start of a massive military mobilization. The heavy gates slam open with a thunderous boom, revealing the army waiting within. The Kingdom of Azul's Order of Chivalry is ordered to advance and form a battle line. Soldiers shout in unison as they prepare to march out for the coming conflict. Rows of uniformed boots stomp in rhythm as the troops mobilize with discipline. Commanders urge the Order of Chivalry to give it their all and defeat the Gree bastards. The soldiers march with grim determination, sweat running down their faces as they head toward war. Meanwhile, messengers sprint urgently toward a large, walled estate to deliver critical news. They arrive at the Alcott residence, apologizing for the late intrusion as they seek an audience with Duke Alcott. The messengers report that the Azul army has deployed because the Republic of Gree is expanding toward the Cristo Mountains. While the vanguard has taken position, an enraged Duke Olcott demands to know the status of the savages. The report confirms that the enemy forces are currently on standby about 20 kilometers southwest of the Kingdom of Azul. On the opposing side, brutish warriors laugh and wait for the signal to kill them all. Back in safety, the Duke smirks maliciously, declaring that the coup d'état finally begins. Almost 2 weeks pass since that declaration, marking a period of ominous silence. Ethel eats breakfast, noting that his parents seemed too stupid to take revenge, when his mother calls him to the table. A sudden knock interrupts their meal, and Ethel stands to answer it while his mother wonders who it could be. Ethel opens the door and freezes in shock at the sight of blood pooling on the threshold. A massive, armored figure looms in the doorway, causing Ethel's mother to shriek in terror. A wounded man stands with the giant, panting heavily as he apologizes for startling them. A peaceful silence is broken by the soft, rhythmic breathing of a sleeping infant wrapped in heavy blankets. The mage's eyes widen in sheer disbelief as he stammers, asking if the bundle before him is truly a human baby. 12 hours earlier, the imposing silhouette of the Kingdom of Azul stood tall against the sky, unaware of the treachery brewing within its walls. In the royal palace, the royal guard commander rallies his men to secure the territory, explaining that the main army is away on a grand campaign. The guards grumble about the dire situation, complaining that they are so short-staffed they must rely on the little chicks from the military academy. A grim report circulates among the ranks that the cabinet minister is plotting to assassinate His Highness the Crown Prince during the chaos. The political tension stems from a succession dispute, as the current king is the second son, while the ambitious cabinet minister is the first son. Since the king had only produced daughters, the minister's faction had long assumed the crown would eventually pass to the first son's heir. However, destiny shifted when the queen defied expectations and finally gave birth to a male heir, the crown prince. This unexpected birth shattered the minister's ambitions, causing his faction to suddenly burst with murderous killing intent. Rumors of a dark plan to assassinate the newborn crown prince began to spread through the court as a very real possibility. Chaos erupts as a guard reports that savages from the south have breached the capital, and the blonde knight realizes his own father, the minister, is behind the invasion. The heavy doors are smashed open with a thunderous crash, sending debris flying and shocking the knights inside. Realizing the capital is lost, the commander screams for his men to take the crown prince to a safe place immediately. A horde of barbarian warriors charges forward with spears and swords, their war cries drowning out the panic of the castle. The knights engage in a desperate melee, bodies colliding and swords clashing as they fight to buy time. In the nursery, the savages lunge for the royal crib, forcing the guards to throw themselves in the path of the blades to protect the infant. Glass shatters and stone crumbles as the battle spills outward, sending combatants plummeting from the high windows of the palace. Blood sprays across the walls as the defenders are overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity of the invading assassins. The blonde knight fights with desperate resolve, parrying deadly strikes while his comrades fall around him in defense of their charge. Back in the present, the knight explains that they rushed to this location because it was the only safe house that came to mind during their escape. He reveals to the stunned residents that they barely escaped with their lives, seeking refuge in a place they hoped was secure. The young mage looks down at the innocent child, trembling with anger that anyone could do such a terrible thing to a little kid. The knight questions how the savages penetrated so deep into the capital, realizing the defenses must have been sabotaged from within. He deduces that the head of the cabinet minister's faction, his own father, orchestrated the attack to seize the throne. As the knight speaks, the spirit of Ethel realizes with a shock that this blonde warrior is actually his own direct descendant. The knight concludes that returning to the capital is impossible and decides their safest option is to flee across the country's borders. Their objective is to reach the country's main army stationed abroad and safely deliver His Highness into their protection. They agree to depart the next morning, though they worry the freezing temperatures tonight will be hard on the baby's frail body. As the sun rises the next day, the group prepares to leave, and the woman named Ilya bids them a careful journey. Just as they turn to go, Ilya calls out for them to wait, halting their departure. The young mage steps forward with determination in his eyes and begs them to let him join their party. He internally reflects on the moment long ago when he was honored with the title of For Emperors by the previous king. Driven by that ancient oath, he feels a heavy responsibility to protect this country and its future. He declares, "I will," with conviction, and the knights welcome him, relieved to have even one extra ally in their dire situation. Ethel silently vows to himself that he will deal with this threat using the full force of his magic. As he waves goodbye to a tearful Ilya, he apologizes to his mother in his heart, unable to forgive his father's treachery. The group reviews their route, planning to descend the mountains, cross the Moralis Plains, and leave Neil Forest to reach the border. Their planning is interrupted by a sudden rustling in the bushes, putting the experienced knight on high alert. The knight quickly assesses the threat, calculating that they are outnumbered 2 to 5 and will be at a disadvantage if one must protect the prince. A voice cries out in desperation, asking if anyone can hear them amidst the chaos. In a blinding flash of speed, Ethel devastates the enemy ranks, sending bodies flying in all directions. The remaining soldiers stand frozen in shock, screaming as they struggle to comprehend the instant destruction. Terror grips the survivors as they realize their entire squad was wiped out in a single heartbeat. Ethel stands amidst the dust, his expression calm and unbothered by the violence he just unleashed. The last standing enemy trembles in fear, realizing he is the only one left to face the monster. Ethel dashes forward to finish the job, but his companion screams for him to halt and not chase too far. The group regroups, deciding that securing the crown prince's safety takes priority over slaughtering the remaining foes. Joachim praises Ethel, admitting that his swordsmanship is no longer inferior even to Headmaster Moria's. The large man grumbles that Ethel is probably faster than him now, though he tries to downplay it with a joke. He immediately retorts with childish pride, shouting that he is actually still the faster one. The banter is cut short as Ethel senses something wrong and urges everyone to hurry. They move through the dense forest, the tension mounting with every step they take. Ethel pauses, scanning the surroundings as he notes how strangely quiet the forest has become. Joachim agrees, realizing the unnatural silence suggests even the animals have fled in fear. A sudden, ominous sound rumbles through the trees, freezing the group in their tracks. The forest canopy looms above them, the peaceful scenery hiding a deadly threat closing in. Ethel and his companions look around in confusion, trying to pinpoint the source of the disturbance. Ethel identifies the signature of lightning essence and realizes that stopping there is the worst possible idea. He shouts a command to run, urging the group to escape the forest immediately before it's too late. They sprint desperately through the woods, panting heavily as they race against an unseen clock. Joachim spots something ahead and yells for everyone to wait, his eyes widening in alarm. The group skids to a halt, staring at the terrifying sight revealed through the gap in the trees. Ethel recognizes the banners of the Order of Sorcery, realizing the Duke has brought his elite forces. He deduces the enemy's brutal strategy, fearing they plan to siege the forest and scorch the earth. Panic sets in as they look back and see the path they came from is already engulfed in flames. Ethel realizes the roaring sound they heard earlier was the forest being set ablaze to trap them. The baby begins to cry in the chaos, while the large man grimly notes they are being flushed out like game. He asks desperately if there is any strategy to ensure at least the crown prince survives this trap. Ethel explains that charging into the open plains would only make them helpless targets for concentrated magic. The situation is dire, with flames closing in from behind and the Order of Sorcery waiting ahead. Headmaster Moria makes a grim decision, asking Ethel to take the prince while he stays behind. He declares he will fight to the bitter end, believing that pure spirit can overcome the odds. Ethel coldly rejects the plan as unrealistic, telling the headmaster to run while he raids the enemy instead. He admits he doesn't dislike Moria's spirit, but he has no patience for meaningless self-sacrifice. Ethel resolves to go and persuade his father, believing there is still a chance for words. He smiles confidently, claiming his father isn't such a bad man, despite the shock of his companions. Ethel steps out into the open unarmed, shouting for his father to listen to him before attacking. He stands alone on the scorched field, facing the massive army and the imposing figure of the Duke. The Duke looks down from his command post with a smirk, satisfied that he has finally flushed his prey out. Fraser raises his arms in a desperate plea, begging the opposing forces to cease their hostilities and talk things through. He implores them to return to the royal capital together, insisting there is still time to pretend this conflict never happened. Duke Alcott sneers at his son with disdain, remarking that Fraser has always been a nuisance who gets in his way. Fraser freezes in shock, as the Duke raises his hand to signal the final execution order. With a ferocious expression, the Duke screams at his troops to kill him immediately. He ruthlessly commands them to burn the rest of the forest to ashes along with their target. Soldiers initiate a massive ritual formation, invoking a legendary spell that bears the name of one of the 4 emperors. The level 6 Emperor of Thunder spell activates, and Ethel is warned to run as resistance against such power is futile. Observers note that this ultimate treasure is a power the Duke's family can control as the sky darkens. A massive column of lightning crashes down from the heavens, obliterating the area where the brothers stand. Ethel screams his brother's name in terror as Fraser dives in front of him to intercept the devastating blast. The Duke laughs maniacally, calling them fools as the relentless lightning continues to pour down on them. Fraser offers a final, gentle smile, accepting his fate with peace amidst the destruction. The magical impact blows Fraser away, sending his body flying through the air. A large soldier mocks Fraser as an imbecile for jumping into the blaze while holding Ethel back. Ethel reaches out desperately toward his fallen brother, stammering his name while being restrained. A close-up reveals Ethel's expression shifting from despair to a chilling, empty void. Smoke rises from the scorched earth where Fraser's lifeless body lies alone in the distance. Memories of happier times, laughing, drinking, and sparring with his big brother, flash through Ethel's mind. The soldier freezes, sensing a terrifying change in Ethel as the boy mutters that this is unforgivable. Ethel stands up with eyes glowing like a demon, emitting a dark pressure that distorts the air around him. He recalls Merlin's warning about his anger changing him, while the soldier stammers in fear at the overwhelming aura. Ethel coldly calls the soldier a fool and declares he will teach them the true method of using magic. With a single word, he casts the level 9 absolute freeze spell, Cositus. The spell activates instantly, sending a shockwave of magical energy outward. The landscape freezes in a heartbeat, transforming the forest into a silent, icy hellscape. The large soldier is frozen solid mid-scream, encased in ice along with the trees around him. The Duke and his army look down from their vantage point, gasping in horror as the ice spreads rapidly toward them. Panic erupts as the Duke screams, demanding to know what is happening and if this is magic of unprecedented might. He realizes with dread that Ethel is casting unheard-of magic solo, while Ethel muses that nothing can stop this. Ethel walks calmly through the ice, noting casually that he does not even specialize in water magic. The Duke recognizes his son Ethel and shrieks in terror, realizing his combat teachings are useless against this monster. He falls into denial, screaming that it is impossible for a mere kid to wield such catastrophic power. Desperate to regain control, the Duke orders his order of sorcery to attack the enemy immediately. The mages obey, launching a barrage of level 5 magic arrows in a formation called Arrow Storm. The Duke screams for them to fire, putting all his hope into overwhelming the boy with numbers. Countless glowing arrows rain down from the sky, aiming to obliterate the lone figure below. Ethel looks up with a bored expression, wondering why these mages cannot handle a level 5 spell on their own. The arrow storm strikes, causing a massive explosion that kicks up a cloud of dust and debris. The Duke clenches his fist in triumph, shouting, "Superb," as he believes the attack has successfully destroyed his son. A sudden magical impact slams into the ground, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and debris. Ethel stands within the smoke, scoffing that such a pathetic attack would never be enough to hit him. The assassins gasp in horror, screaming, "How is he alive?" as Ethel emerges unscathed. They panic, realizing he took a direct hit from level 5 explosive arrows and didn't even flinch. Ethel mocks their incompetence, asking if they've never heard of passive magical defense circles. The enemy leader grits his teeth, sweating as he realizes they are facing a monster. Desperate, the leader commands his squad to use their ultimate trump card to kill him. They prepare a massive spell, ironically shouting to make him eat the level 6 Emperor of Thunder Ethel. The squad fires the critical lightning blast, unleashing a torrent of magical energy. Ethel catches the attack with one hand, insulted that they would attach his name to such weak magic. A massive explosion erupts, blinding the battlefield with white light. The smoke clears to reveal Ethel unharmed, and the assassins tremble, asking if he is a monster. Ethel glares at them with glowing eyes, calling them truly pathetic beings. The assassins recoil in fear, realizing their legendary spell was erased instantly. Ethel decides to test his swordsmanship, wondering if he can use a blade perfectly in real combat. He dashes forward with blinding speed, his sword drawn for a lethal strike. He slashes through the enemy formation, his blade moving faster than they can react. "Okay, that's one," he counts casually as an assassin's head splits open. The enemy commander screams, "Fire!" in a panic, trying to stop his advance. Ethel laughs maniacally, deciding he'll kill 200 of them instead of just 100 for the fun of it. He counts 3, 2, as he cuts them down with ruthless efficiency. He recites a dark poem about spilling blood as he dances through their ranks. He activates Level 2 Lightning Burst, infusing his sword with crackling electricity. A massive beam of lightning extends from his blade, cleaving through the air. The attack annihilates a swath of enemies, leaving only charred remains. Ethel mocks the survivors for using magical arrow garbage against him. He tells a screaming mage to zip his mouth before swinging his sword. He blows the man's jaw off, sending the other assassins fleeing in sheer terror. One assassin screams, "He isn't human," as they scramble to escape the slaughter. Ethel walks calmly after them, asking if their mothers never taught them not to turn their backs. He cuts down the fleeing cowards without mercy, blood spraying across the ground. He pauses, looking bored as the last few try to crawl away. He decides that since they won't give him sword practice, he has no choice but to end it. He raises his hand, promising to give them a pleasant show for their trip to Hades. The sky above begins to darken rapidly as he channels his mana. Dark storm clouds gather instantly, swirling with unnatural energy. The assassins look up in despair, realizing he is controlling the weather itself with lost magic. Ethel corrects them, shouting that he isn't controlling the clouds, but the lightning itself. He casts Level 10 Emperor of Thunder Ethel, summoning the true power of the heavens. A catastrophic pillar of lightning slams into the earth, vaporizing the enemy squad in an instant. The massive pillar of lightning annihilates the target area, erupting with a force that shreds the ground and fills the air with blinding light. Helpless against the shockwave, the sorcerers are flung through the air like ragdolls amidst the debris of their shattered formation. The overwhelming power of the S-rank magician is cemented in the destruction, marking a decisive and brutal victory over the ambushers. Amidst the crackling remnants of the storm, Ethel stands cloaked in shadow, his silhouette radiating lethal magical energy. The remaining soldiers are scattered by the blast, their bodies twisting in the air as the residual lightning hunts them down. A secondary wave of destruction rolls over the battlefield, churning the earth and engulfing everything in a cloud of dust and power. Structures collapse and screams echo as the terrified survivors witness the absolute devastation of their ritual site. The sorcerers writhe in agony, their faces contorted with pain as the aftershocks of the lightning spell ravage their bodies. A heavy silence descends as the dust begins to settle, the air thick with the ozone scent of high-tier magic. As the smoke clears, 2 spherical barriers are revealed amidst the corpses, protecting the masterminds from the annihilation. Inside the barriers, the stunned father and son realize they have miraculously survived the Emperor of Thunder's judgment. They lower their arms, bewildered by their survival while looking around at the total destruction of their subordinates. A lone figure emerges from the dust, walking calmly toward them through the wreckage of the battlefield. Ethel approaches with a cold, impassive expression, his eyes locked onto the traitors he spared. The father stammers in disbelief, unable to comprehend that the monster walking toward them is his own little brother, Ethel. Terror grips them as they recoil, screaming for the monster to stay away from them. Regaining his arrogance, the father threatens Ethel, demanding to know if he thinks he can get away with opposing the order of sorcery. Ethel silences the man mid-sentence with a brutal punch to the face, shattering his jaw and his authority in one motion. The impact sends the traitor tumbling across the dirt, leaving him sprawled humiliatingly on the ground. Ethel coldly explains that simply annihilating them would be too merciful, as he needs the mastermind alive to face proper justice for attempting to assassinate the crown prince. The traitor cowers on the ground, stuttering in fear as the reality of his situation finally sets in. Desperate to regain control, the father screams that opposing him constitutes treason against the army itself. Ethel responds with a swift kick, catching the screaming man mid-shout and launching him through the air. The traitor crashes face-first into the rubble, his face planting violently into the earth with a sickening crunch. Ethel declares that heretics who would kill their own sons deserve no mercy and pronounces that they shall be hanged for their crimes. Leaving the broken traitors in the dust, Ethel turns his back and walks away, his retribution complete. Following the incident, the masterminds Alcott and Joachim are publicly beheaded, and their attempted coup d'état ends in total failure. Their lifeless feet dangle in the air, a grim testament to the price of treason against the crown. Sometime later, Ethel runs through the fields, reflecting on how the dukedom came under suspicion due to the incident. He stops running, a genuine smile breaking across his face as he sees the person he was looking for. He calls out happily to his big brother Fraser, asking if he caused him too much worry. Fraser assures him that he has fully healed, though Ethel worries if it is safe for him to be moving around so soon. Fraser reveals a necklace, admitting he never expected the family heirloom to actually save his life. The item is revealed to be Oberon's Guard, the king of the fairies' protective stone, which Ethel had secretly utilized long ago. Ethel internally rejoices that Fraser had the item equipped, as it deployed a shield the moment the Order of Sorcery attacked him. Unaware of Ethel's intervention, Fraser hugs him and credits his survival to the divine protection of the Emperor of Thunder. Due to Fraser's heroic defense of the Crown Prince, the family avoids losing their status, and the rank of Duke is preserved. Fraser, the second son, officially succeeds the house, taking over leadership of the dukedom that had lost its head. In a happy conclusion, Ethel and his mother are allocated a luxurious room in the estate, finally safe and free to live in peace. The story shifts to a view of the distant mountains, signaling the end of this arc and the beginning of a new journey. Headmaster Moria crosses his arms and formally asks Ethel to begin his demonstration. Ethel warns the observers to step back for safety as he prepares to erect a protective barrier. Ethel swings his arm forward, channeling a massive surge of power that radiates outward in a blinding flash. A terrifying vortex of dark energy swirls into existence, consuming the space before them and warping the air itself. Fraser and Headmaster Moria recoil in sheer shock, their faces twisted in disbelief at the scale of the magic. The landscape is torn asunder by the spell, trees and earth shredded by the violent magical storm. Fraser shields his face against the intense heat wave radiating from the destruction, crying out in amazement. As the first spell settles, Ethel calmly announces he will cast one more, leaving the spectators dumbfounded. Moria questions his own sanity, wondering if he is dreaming as the devastating power unfolds before him. The headmaster identifies the spells as consecutive level 7 fire and wind magic, marveling at the impossible caliber of sorcery. Staring into the fading aftermath, Moria realizes he is finally witnessing the true nature of Ethel. Ethel turns to his stunned family and apologizes for keeping his true strength hidden from them for so long. He hesitates, struggling internally to find a plausible explanation for his overwhelming abilities without revealing his past. Fraser steps in immediately, assuring Ethel that he does not need to explain if he doesn't want to. Moria agrees with Fraser, acknowledging that such power likely requires secrecy for a good reason. Ethel privately resolves to keep his reincarnation and the goddess a secret, realizing the truth is too unbelievable. The three come to a mutual agreement to keep this display of power a strict secret between them. Fraser warns his brother that this power stands out too much and should not be used publicly. Moria gravely adds that revealing such strength would inevitably plunge the world into chaos. Shifting the topic, they ask Ethel what he plans to do regarding his future and the military academy. Ethel firmly declares that he intends to enroll in an academy of sorcery instead. The declaration leaves Fraser and Moria stunned into silence by the unexpected change in his path. Moria explodes in confusion, asking why someone with such immense power would even need to attend a school for sorcery. Ethel explains that after 400 years, he needs to research modern magic compatibility and learn what has changed. Realizing Ethel's mind is made up, Moria and Fraser accept his decision with resignation. Ethel smiles to himself, knowing that he can no longer stay stagnant in this place. He looks out over the vast landscape, acknowledging that there is a limit to what he can achieve alone. Moria suddenly slaps Ethel on the back with a hearty laugh, nearly knocking the wind out of the boy. The headmaster declares that until Ethel turns 15 and takes the exam, they will continue to drill him in swordsmanship. Fraser joins in with a grin, warning Ethel that he isn't ready to lose to him in a sword fight just yet. And so, the years drift by in the blink of an eye as Ethel trains for his future. The seasons change over the estate as the timeline jumps forward to the day of departure. Ethel leaves a heartfelt letter thanking his family for their support as he heads out to take the entrance exam. A lone figure walks away from the manor, carrying his belongings toward the horizon. As the family eats breakfast inside, Ethel pauses outside, admitting to himself that he already misses his home. Just as he prepares to leave, a familiar voice calls out his name from behind. The hem of a dress rustles as someone approaches the departing traveler. Ethel turns in surprise to see his mother, Fraser, and Moria standing there to see him off. His mother smiles gently, telling him that no mother would be unaware of what her son is thinking. Tears well up in Ethel's eyes as he turns away, knowing that if he looks back now, he will surely cry. Ethel is caught off guard when his mother suddenly rushes out and embraces him tightly from behind. She tearfully scolds him for trying to leave without saying goodbye, prompting Ethel to apologize softly. Wiping her tears, she assures him that he is an adult now and free to pursue his dreams, but reminds him he can always come home. Ethel hugs her back with deep gratitude, thanking her for raising him with love for the past 15 years. Moria blames his tears on sand in his eyes while Ethel's mother smiles warmly at her son's growth. Ethel narrates that at 15 years old, his journey to pursue the heights of sorcery has finally begun. He waves goodbye to his family, vowing to conquer the wall of natural talent and reach the absolute peak. As he walks away, he promises himself that he will never again fall into the despair he felt in his past life. His expression hardens with resolve, his eyes fixed firmly on the path ahead. He turns back one last time to bow deeply, offering a silent prayer of thanks for everything they have given him. Turning his back on his home, he marches forward without stopping, aiming straight for the summit of magic. The scenery shifts to a bustling trade road where carriages pass by as Ethel continues his long trek. He decides to take a short break, relieved to have finally reached a major highway used by travelers. Spotting a roadside tea house, he excitedly decides it is the perfect place to rest his legs. He sits down at a table, exhaling deeply as the reality of finally leaving his homeland settles in. While reading, he reminds himself to keep a low profile to avoid unnecessary trouble that might hinder his academy enrollment. He shudders at the thought of being burdened with the title of hero, preferring to attain the crown of arts as an ordinary person. His reading is interrupted by a loud, sycophantic laugh praising a man named Edward Summa. A local man is profusely thanking the renowned Wildfire Edwards for visiting their humble rural town. Edwards arrogantly silences the man, demanding he not speak without permission when asked to lecture the children. He coldly points out that he is busy reading and asks if the man is too stupid to notice. The local man panics and screams an apology, terrified of offending the high-ranking mage. Edwards lectures him with a sneer, claiming his own time is worth gold dust while the time of others is mere sludge. The man prostrates himself on the floor, sweating profusely as he begs for forgiveness. Ethel watches the display from his table, disgusted by the mage's overwhelming arrogance. Edwards boasts that he is already an A-rank adventurer at the young age of 20, a fact he considers obvious. He mocks the older man, sneering that he is merely a 50-year-old C-rank adventurer in comparison. Edwards continues his verbal assault, calling the man's life of teaching magic in the countryside a pile of garbage. The broken man accepts the insults with a bowed head, desperate for even a shred of recognition. The local attempts to change the subject to a welcome banquet, but suddenly remembers a crucial detail. Edward's expression twists into a grotesque look of anticipation as the man mentions the special occasion. The scene shifts to a young girl bound by chains, gasping as she is pulled forward. Edwards declares that tonight is a special milestone between him and this demon girl. He lifts her garment to reveal a complex slave mark etched onto her thigh. The girl trembles in fear and humiliation, unable to escape her bonds. The local man notes that the time required for the slave mark to fully acclimatize to her body has passed. Edwards confirms that implanting his seed before the mark set would have disturbed the incantation. He licks his lips with predatory hunger, confirming that the precise moment for consummation has arrived. Ethel feels nauseated, realizing the mage is celebrating the start of the recommended period for sexual intercourse with his slave. Despite his desire to stay unnoticed, Ethel stares at the scene, his resolve wavering in the face of such evil. Ethel reflects on the past, realizing that without his intervention, the girl might have suffered a cruel fate as a slave. A waitress welcomes a customer to the establishment, but the peaceful atmosphere is shattered by a sudden commotion outside. A panicked shout reveals the presence of a terrifying orc giant, causing Ethel to pause in surprise. The villagers scream in terror at the potential disaster, while Ethel questions the sudden appearance of such a monster. The massive orc giant stands amidst the destruction, its jaws working as it consumes something with gruesome sounds. The beast's massive back looms over the village, a towering mountain of muscle and threat that freezes the onlookers. A close-up reveals the monster's drooling maw as it continues its feast, oblivious to the humans watching. A villager trembles in hopelessness, unsure of what to do against such an overwhelming force. Desperate cries ring out for an adventurer or the Order of Chivalry, as the guild is deemed useless in this crisis. A confident voice cuts through the panic, urging everyone to remain calm as a hero steps forward. The crowd introduces Edwards the Wildfire, identifying him as a prestigious A-rank adventurer. Hope returns to the villagers as they realize an A-rank is among them, capable of subjugating the B-rank orc giant. Edwards smirks with arrogance, declaring that such an inferior creature is nothing for someone of his caliber to fear. The village girls swoon over his confidence, while Ethel watches the display from the sidelines. Ethel observes the scene, noting that even 400 years later, A-rank adventurers are held in high regard. Edwards steps forward and taunts the monster, calling the inferior creature to face him. He prepares his spell, promising to display true magic to the watching crowd. With a theatrical pose, he boasts that a countryside village rarely gets to witness such power. He begins his incantation, calling upon the spirit of the atmosphere to lend him power. The orc giant pauses its rampage, its beady eyes finally locking onto the mage challenge. Edwards completes the spell, commanding the manifestation of an ultimate flame blast. A massive fireball erupts on impact, engulfing the target in a violent explosion of smoke and flame. Edwards strikes a victory pose, cheering for his own mastery of the ultimate, level 4 magic. Ethel watches with a deadpan expression, unimpressed that level 4 is considered supreme class magic in this era. The villagers cheer wildly for their savior, while Edwards smugly declares the show is over. Edwards pauses as the smoke lingers, sensing that something is wrong despite the celebration. The orc giant emerges from the smoke completely unharmed, shaking off the attack as if it were nothing. Edwards stares in disbelief, unable to comprehend how his supreme magic failed to leave even a scratch. Terror replaces arrogance on his face as he realizes the true nature of the beast he is facing. He identifies the monster not as a giant, but as an orc berserker, the highest class among its kind. The realization hits that level 4 magic is utterly ineffective against the magic-resistant hide of a berserker. Edwards instantly turns tail and flees, abandoning all dignity as he admits he cannot win. He frantically casts a new spell, calling upon the spirits to manifest a solid barrier. The villagers gasp in horror as a magical wall surrounds them, trapping them in the path of the monster. Edwards laughs maniacally as he reveals that he has trapped them to serve as decoys for his escape. He justifies his cowardice with twisted logic, claiming a noble like him cannot be allowed to die here. The betrayed villagers scream for mercy, banging on the barrier as they beg to be let out. The orc berserker turns its attention to the trapped meal, ignoring the fleeing mage. The monster's face fills the view, its tusks dripping with anticipation as it closes in on the helpless crowd. Chaos erupts as the villagers scramble in futility, their screams marking the beginning of a massacre. Ethel unleashes the level 6 Seraph's Gospel, casting Seraph Dispel to shatter the magical defenses hindering his path. The spell impacts with blinding force, ripping through the air and destabilizing the enemy's barrier in a flash of white light. The blonde man and the slave girl watch in stunned silence as their protection crumbles before their very eyes. Panic erupts among the ambushers as they scream that the barrier is gone and scramble to flee for their lives. The attackers scatter in every direction, desperate to escape the overwhelming power of the mage who crushed their defense. Ethel sighs as he watches them run, muttering to himself that things are becoming a bit problematic. He turns and begins to walk away from the site of the ambush, leaving the destruction and the cowards behind. The vast, rocky landscape stretches out before him as he travels alone under the open sky. Ethel glances back and realizes that the slave girl from the ambush is trailing behind him. She quickly ducks behind a rock formation, trying poorly to conceal her presence from him. Ethel stops and calls out, asking how long she plans to keep following him like that. She flinches and stammers, realizing she has been caught red-handed by the terrifying mage. She steps out and apologizes, explaining that the blonde man surrendered and left her behind. Ethel notices she is barefoot and shackled, having followed him closely despite her miserable condition. She blushes and tries to articulate a request, stuttering over her words in pure nervousness. Ethel tilts his head in confusion, mishearing her stuttering and asking if she said, "which?" She nervously fidgets and tries again to explain the wish she has been trying to voice. Bowing her head, she finally manages to ask him to please become her new master. Ethel recoils in shock, completely taken aback by the sudden and bizarre request from the girl. She explains that as a runaway slave with a mark, she has no rights and faces torture if caught. Her voice trembles as she describes the grim fate of being sold back to a trader or killed without a master. She prostrates herself on the ground, begging for his protection to avoid a horrific death. Ethel observes the complex slave hex on her chest, noting that it binds her even without a master present. He analyzes the magic, realizing that a slave mark with a severed link essentially makes her free but vulnerable. She looks up with teary eyes, telling him that he seems infinitely kinder than her previous master. Ethel awkwardly accepts the compliment, agreeing that the blonde man was indeed a piece of trash. Changing the subject, he asks how a demon like her ended up enslaved in the first place. She reveals that her country lost a war to humans long ago and she has been a slave since birth. Her gaze drops as she admits she does not know how to live as anything other than a slave. Ethel reflects on the cruelty of this era, where escaping such status is nearly impossible without help. She suddenly reveals that she is a descendant of the royal demonic family and related to a prestigious headmaster. Ethel listens intently as she claims to be a distant relative of the great Merlin. She hangs her head in shame, lamenting that she has fallen so low despite her noble bloodline. Ethel freezes in his tracks, his eyes widening at the mention of that specific name. He leans in with intense urgency and demands she repeat what she just said. The girl flinches, thinking he is angry or mocking her claim to a noble lineage. She clarifies that she is speaking of Merlin, the legendary apprentice of the Emperor Ethel. Ethel stares at her, his mind racing as the reality of her words sinks in. She continues to praise Merlin as an exceptional sorceress who stands at the pinnacle of their race. Ethel smiles with genuine warmth, overjoyed to know that Merlin lived a great life and left a legacy. Ethel contemplates the revelation that the relative he sought is now the headmaster of an academy of sorcery for demons. He laughs heartily at the situation, accepting the absurdity of it with a wide grin. Ethel is struck by the weight of time, shouting in disbelief that 400 years have truly passed. He reasons that Anastasia's half-vampire heritage explains how she has survived for such an incredible span of time. Ethel declares that he will act as her master for the time being, and she readily accepts the arrangement. Anastasia stares back at him, her expression a mix of surprise and dawning hope. Ethel resolves not to abandon Merlin's relative, while she bows and thanks him profusely for his kindness. He interrupts her gratitude to ask a simple question, shifting the topic. After confirming her name is Anastasia, he expresses hope they will get along, to which she enthusiastically pledges her care. The scene shifts to reveal the sprawling architecture of the town of Darmstadt. Ethel and Anastasia arrive in the town just before sunset, relieving their travel fatigue. Ethel explains that he came to this town specifically to take the entrance exam for the Academy of Sorcery the following day. Anastasia is surprised to learn he is a student, while Ethel suggests they prioritize finding an inn. A loud rumble from Anastasia's stomach interrupts the conversation, causing Ethel to turn in surprise. Anastasia blushes intensely, humiliated by the loud noise her empty stomach made. Ethel chuckles and suggests they eat, though Anastasia tries to stammer out a denial. Ignoring her protests, Ethel declares that they will eat immediately and looks for a restaurant. They arrive at a grand establishment with a sign proclaiming it to be the ultimate steak restaurant Fleisch. Anastasia looks at the fancy building with trepidation, worrying that it is far too expensive. She admits she has no money, but Ethel assures her there is no need to worry about the cost. Ethel excitedly enters, declaring he intends to feast on meat until he collapses to celebrate this important day. The staff welcomes them politely and guides them through the opulent dining hall to a table for two. Ethel smiles at the prospect of meat, while Anastasia looks around nervously at the high-class surroundings. Whispers erupt among the wealthy patrons, who sneer at the dirty slave and the child who brought her. The waiter leads them past the hostile gazes of diners who demand the slave be removed. Anastasia trembles in fear, overwhelmed by the malice directed at her. Ethel remains completely unfazed, his mind focused solely on the meat he is about to eat. The waiter shows them to their table, and Ethel casually thanks him, ignoring the atmosphere. Ethel encourages Anastasia to eat without holding back as he prepares for the meal. He looks across the table and pauses, noticing that the chair opposite him is empty. Turning to his side, he is shocked to find Anastasia kneeling on the floor beside the table. Ethel asks in disbelief what she is doing down there instead of sitting. He tells her to sit in the chair, but she insists the floor is the proper place for a slave. Anastasia looks up with wide eyes, asking if a slave like her is really allowed to join the table. Ethel looks exasperated, asking why she is asking such an obvious question. She explains that a slave must kneel to be ready for orders, but Ethel tells her she doesn't need to do that anymore. She hesitates, calling it irreverent to sit, but Ethel refuses to accept her refusal. Ethel finally orders her as her master to sit, noting internally how deep her slave mentality runs. She complies with the order and sits in the chair, looking nervous as he tells her to eat normally. Ethel praises the soft food, while Anastasia sits opposite him, blushing and shyly agreeing. Ethel sits across from Anastasia at a high-end restaurant, smiling as she fidgets nervously in her seat. A large, arrogant waiter approaches their table, sneering at these kids and mocking the softness of their presence. He interrupts their moment with forced politeness, pressuring them to order quickly so they can leave. He points to a sign on the wall, coldly informing them that slave seating is strictly prohibited in this establishment. Anastasia freezes in fear at the confrontation, while Ethel glares at the waiter with rising irritation. The waiter lectures them, explaining that this restaurant is for the rich and famous, not countryside students who wandered in by mistake. Leaning in with a condescending smirk, he bluntly asks if they even have the money to pay for a meal here. He insists they were only seated due to an employee's error and declares that this is not a place for people like them. Anastasia panic-strickenly suggests they eat at a stall outside to avoid trouble, willing to sit on the floor if necessary. Ethel silences the situation by casually tossing 3 large, shimmering gemstones onto the table. The waiter's eyes bulge in shock as he stares at the jewels, his arrogance instantly replaced by greed and disbelief. Ethel coldly asks if this is enough payment, warning that he has plenty more if it isn't. He flashes the lining of his coat, revealing an entire collection of high-purity gems sewn into the fabric. The gems sparkle intensely, blinding the waiter with a display of wealth that far exceeds the restaurant's value. The waiter adjusts his monocle in frenzy, screaming that they are dragon drops, rare illusory gems from the Kaiser dragon. He mentally calculates that a single stone is worth 50 gold coins, realizing he has insulted a customer of astronomical wealth. He immediately prostrates himself on the checkered floor, stammering out his humblest apologies to the VIPs. Ethel ignores the groveling and orders all the highest-grade meat they have, telling the man to keep the change. He hands a gem to the trembling waiter, who screams his obedience and rushes to the kitchen to fulfill the command. Sizzling steaks of the highest quality are plated, dripping with juices and savory aroma. An entire line of waiters bows respectfully as the food is brought out, completely changing their attitude toward the guests. Ethel happily digs in, telling Anastasia that this is exactly the kind of meal he wanted her to experience. Anastasia hesitates, blushing as she looks at the food, unsure if she is allowed to partake in such luxury. She asks timidly if it is truly fine for her to eat, prompting Ethel to encourage her not to hold back. She stares at the food, murmuring that she feels unworthy as a slave to be treated this way. Ethel frames the meal as a celebration of their new journey to help her accept it without guilt. He teases her by asking if she dislikes meat, and she quickly denies it, taking a bite and marveling at the taste. As she eats, Ethel brings up a serious topic, acknowledging the outrageous treatment she suffered as a slave. He sympathizes with her past, realizing she has endured terrible experiences that forced her to suppress her emotions. He promises her that he will never treat her in such a way, no matter what happens in the future. He gives her explicit permission to feel free to get angry at him if he ever crosses a line. Anastasia looks at him with blank confusion, unable to even comprehend the concept of getting angry. Ethel realizes she has been oppressed for so long that she has lost the very notion of standing up for herself. He clarifies his statement, trying to explain the concept of personal will to her broken spirit. He tells her simply that she is free to say no to things she does not like. Anastasia stares at him wide-eyed, the words sinking into her heart for the first time. She chews quietly, processing his permission to be her own person amidst the sounds of the restaurant. Blushing furiously, she softly agrees, accepting his command to regain her humanity. Ethel immediately suggests they practice right now, urging her to try getting angry at him for a start. The night ends with them laughing as Anastasia clumsily tries to express anger, biting her tongue in the process. 2 birds chirp peacefully in the sunlit branches, signaling the start of a momentous morning. The day has finally arrived for the prestigious Krone Academy of Sorcery entrance exam. Ethel and Anastasia stand before the sprawling academy campus, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the city-like institution. Amidst the bustling crowd, Ethel spots the registration sign while Anastasia timidly looks around for the reception area. Anastasia clutches her new outfit and stammers a shy thank you to her master for the gift. Ethel smiles warmly and assures her that she never has to wear the rags of a slave ever again. A beaming smile lights up Anastasia's face as she revels in the kindness and her newfound freedom. Ethel comments on the massive turnout, explaining that the academy is famous for its unusually high acceptance rate. As they wait in line, he notes that the particular nature of the acceptance rate draws in vast numbers of hopefuls. He explains that the academy's unique system funnels graduates into specific career paths like elite or specialist. Because graduation guarantees a stable job without the need for connections, people from all walks of life flock to take the exam. A sudden realization strikes Ethel as he looks at Anastasia, and he claps his hands together with an idea. He turns to her with a grin and suggests that she should try taking the entrance exam alongside him. Anastasia is shocked and flustered, but Ethel insists that the open qualification policy means even she can apply to learn valuable skills. Swept up by his encouragement, they approach the desk and register 2 applicants instead of 1. The receptionist processes their paperwork and directs the pair to head inside toward the Coliseum for the main event. Anastasia follows close behind Ethel, her nervousness mixed with a new sense of resolve as they walk down the corridor. Towering rock pillars loom over the landscape, creating a majestic and intimidating backdrop for the testing grounds. The pair steps out onto the massive Coliseum floor, joining a sea of hundreds of other examinees waiting for the trials. Ethel glances around and notices several menacing, battle-scarred rivals who look ready to tear the competition apart. Anastasia looks around the venue with wide eyes, whispering to Ethel that there seem to be many powerful people present. A loud voice commands the attention of all exam takers, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. Franz Bauer, a B-rank adventurer, introduces himself as the proctor and announces that the first stage will be a battle royale. He points a finger at the crowd, instructing 50 of them to climb onto the arena for the first round. Bauer explains that the melee will continue until only 5 participants remain standing. He declares that they are free to use any means necessary, including magic and weapons, to knock their rivals out of the ring. With a final shout, he concludes the briefing, making it clear that the rules are absolute. Anastasia whispers that he is uncaring, unaware that Bauer is already calling for volunteers to fight. Bauer stops mid-sentence, his ear twitching as he turns to confront the student who dared to call him uncaring. A tense silence falls as Bauer locks eyes with Ethel and Anastasia, his expression darkening with irritation. He rants that proctoring this exam is like dredging through an insane amount of mud just to find a single diamond. Screaming at the students, he calls them all incompetent trash, noting that the truly talented ones already received recommendations. He crosses his arms, sneering that he refuses to waste his effort on garbage regardless of their family background. Bauer focuses his glare on Ethel, deciding to forcefully designate him and Anastasia as participants since they caught his attention. He orders the 2 of them to come up to the arena immediately, singling them out for public humiliation. As they approach, he mocks them with a sadistic grin, telling them to try not to leave the arena too quickly. Turning back to the hesitation in the crowd, he challenges anyone else who wants to pass the exam to come up. A group of hulking, scarred warriors enthusiastically volunteers, raising their hands with predatory excitement. Anastasia trembles as she climbs the stairs, while other candidates rush past her with lethal intent. The arena fills with 50 combatants, leaving Ethel and Anastasia standing isolated in the center. Anastasia gasps in fear as she realizes the danger, while Ethel remains calm and observant. The surrounding thugs leer at them, their faces twisted into expressions of sadistic anticipation. The massive warriors close the circle, completely surrounding the smaller pair with a wall of muscle and malice. Anastasia panics, admitting she cannot handle close combat, while Ethel realizes they are being targeted as the weakest links. Ethel calmly steps forward, instructing Anastasia to stay back and let him handle the situation. The exam begins, and the surrounding mob instantly lunges at Ethel with weapons drawn to crush him. A sharp, confident glint appears in Ethel's eyes as he prepares to engage the oncoming wave. The battle royale erupts into chaos, with the mob converging on the 2 students in the center of the arena. From the sidelines, Bauer hums a tune, thinking about how easy and sweet this proctoring job is for a B-rank adventurer. He complains internally that he hasn't found a single promising candidate in the last 200 applicants he observed. Leaning on the railing, he cynically muses that he gets paid just to safely watch kids fight. On the arena floor, Ethel stands motionless while Anastasia cowers behind him, the enemies closing the distance. The thugs swing their weapons in a coordinated strike, convinced that the small boy and girl are finished. Bauer watches with a smirk, amused that the two arrogant kids were instantly surrounded and doomed. He mentally absolves himself of guilt, thinking they shouldn't blame him for sending them to their inevitable defeat. Suddenly, a massive, stitched-up body flies through the air upside down, defying all logic. The spectators gasp in collective shock as the impossible trajectory of the victim registers with the crowd. The giant crashes violently into the wall right next to Bauer, sending debris flying and shaking the ground. Bauer flinches in terror, screaming in confusion as he tries to comprehend what just happened right next to him. Before he can recover, more bodies are launched out of the arena at high speed, leaving Bauer to shout in sheer disbelief. Swords clash violently as the battle royale erupts into a chaotic whirlwind of steel and aggression. Bodies are sent flying through the air as the sheer force of the combatants overwhelms the weaker participants. The announcer's voice cuts through the noise to declare that 9 contestants have already been eliminated from the exam. Ethel smirks with confident amusement, clearly unbothered by the violence unfolding around him. A burly examinee analyzes the situation, realizing Ethel must be using physical enhancement magic to generate such power. The scar-faced warrior watches from the sidelines, acknowledging that the boy's magical reinforcement makes him a significant threat. Rallying his teammates, the scarred man decides they must eliminate Ethel first to have any chance of victory. He grimly notes that a true battle royale only begins once the strongest threat has been neutralized by the collective. Ethel lowers his stance, his eyes sharp and focused as he prepares to face the incoming wave of aggression. Enemy students lunge forward in a coordinated strike, aiming their blades at both Ethel and the defenseless Anastasia. Anastasia screams a warning to her master as she sees the ambush closing in from all sides. Ethel's foot pivots sharply on the stone floor as he shifts his weight to counter the attack. In a blur of motion, he parries multiple blades simultaneously, weaving through the deadly net of steel. A calm smile remains on his face as he dances between the attackers, treating the lethal assault like a game. With a sweeping counterattack, Ethel unleashes a shockwave that blasts the surrounding enemies off their feet. The scar-faced man watches in disbelief as seasoned fighters are tossed into the sky like ragdolls. Ethel continues to move with impossible speed, effortlessly deflecting blows while keeping himself positioned between the mob and Anastasia. His eyes dart around the battlefield, tracking every movement with a precision that defies his young appearance. The observer realizes with horror that this boy possesses the skill of a monstrous swordsman far exceeding A-rank adventurers. He admits to himself that he underestimated the boy, realizing that Ethel is protecting the girl without moving a single step away. Suddenly, the scarred man notices a shift in the attackers' movements as they change their strategy. The mob turns their attention away from the untouchable swordsman and focuses their malice on the vulnerable girl. The leader screams that they are targeting the girl, inciting the crowd to exploit Ethel's only apparent weakness. A swarm of attackers leaps toward Anastasia, taunting Ethel that he cannot possibly save her from so many angles. Anastasia begins a desperate chant as Ethel turns to intercept, but she is already gathering her own power. Her voice rises in a powerful command, calling upon the spirits of the wind to answer her plea. She unleashes a level 3 wind oppression spell known as Sylph's Kiss, triggering a massive magical formation. The attackers freeze in terror as they recognize the high-level magic circle manifesting beneath their feet. A violent tempest erupts instantly, blasting the screaming assailants away with the force of a hurricane. Helpless bodies tumble across the arena, scattered like leaves by the overwhelming pressure of Anastasia's spell. Silence descends on the Colosseum as the dust settles, revealing a completely cleared stage and a stunned audience. The announcer stammers in shock as 16 more candidates are instantly eliminated, clearing the way for the next group. The scarred man's group trembles in fear, questioning why a mage capable of such high-level sorcery is even taking the entrance exam. Ethel sheathes his sword and nonchalantly notes that they might have gone overboard, while Anastasia weeps from the adrenaline. She thanks him profusely for the opportunity, but Ethel cuts the celebration short to address a technicality. He looks at her with genuine confusion and asks if it is really necessary to chant in order to cast magic. The surrounding examinees gasp in collective disbelief, wondering if the kid is insane or simply ignorant of magical laws. The scar-faced man bursts into laughter, mocking Ethel for lacking the most basic common knowledge of sorcery. Ethel dismisses the mockery with a smile, while Anastasia insists that chanting is absolutely essential for spellcasting. Proving them all wrong, Ethel silently unleashes a level 4 Sylph's Deep, explaining that chanting would only slow down such a feat. The examiners are left in complete shock as Ethel unleashes 4 level 4 spells simultaneously without chanting. The sheer force of the parallel activation spell blasts the test dummies into oblivion, sending debris flying everywhere. Observers scream in terror as the shockwave knocks them off their feet and destroys the testing area. The immense power crumbles the stone pillars, burying the targets in rubble and dust. The examiners struggle to comprehend the scene, screaming in disbelief at the destruction. One examiner trembles, noting that casting such high-level magic without chanting is simply impossible for a normal mage. Anastasia watches with awe, blushing as she realizes her master has always possessed this overwhelming power. Ethel scratches his head awkwardly, realizing he may have put a little too much power into the demonstration. The examiners are left wailing in pain and confusion amidst the wreckage of their testing grounds. They question who these two incredible candidates are, unable to accept that such power exists in mere students. The reality of the situation sinks in as they stare at the devastation caused by a single spell. Ethel and Anastasia sheepishly raise their hands to ask if the exam is over, trying to cut through the tension. The head examiner stares at them with a mixture of fear and sweat pouring down his face. He finally snaps out of his daze and loudly declares that the practical exam is concluded. Other candidates groan in pain on the ground, completely overwhelmed by the collateral damage. The examiner forces a laugh, trying to maintain some semblance of authority after the chaos. He announces that candidates 588 and 589 have passed the first examination with flying colors. Ethel celebrates, noting that they have cleared the first barrier and only the written exam remains. He feels confident about the written portion, recalling his past life's intense dedication to magical theory. In his previous life, he lacked natural talent, so he compensated by obsessively researching new magical theories. He remembers that his parallel activation technique was one of the many innovations he developed to rival talented mages. Walking through town, Ethel wonders how Anastasia is feeling about the upcoming written test. Anastasia admits she is nervous, as she was only trained to be a slave and never expected to take an academic exam. Ethel reassures her, determined to give talented individuals like her the chance to grow and succeed. He decides they will return to the inn immediately so he can help her cram for the exam. Anastasia beams with gratitude, thanking him profusely for his kindness and support. The next day arrives, the sun rising over the city and the towering rock formations of the academy. They arrive at the venue for the 456th final written examination of the Krone Academy of Sorcery. Ethel yawns widely, clearly exhausted from staying up all night to help Anastasia study. He apologizes for making her assist him until morning, but she insists she is fine despite the lack of sleep. Ethel sits down at his desk, confident that his past life's knowledge will make this exam a breeze. However, when the exam papers are distributed, his eyes widen in sheer shock at the thickness of the booklet. The other students also stare in horror at the massive stack of papers placed before them. The proctor announces that there is a strict time limit and they must begin immediately. Ethel and Anastasia furiously begin writing, their quills scratching against the paper in a desperate race against time. The intense session continues until the proctor finally shouts for everyone to stop writing. Anastasia turns to Ethel, asking how he did, and he collapses onto the desk in exhaustion. She is shocked to learn that he actually managed to answer every single question in the massive booklet. Ethel assumes that answering all questions was required to pass, but Anastasia looks at him with pity. She reveals that the first page explained it was a free selection exam, meaning he didn't need to answer everything. Anastasia explains that she only solved the solvable parts of the 20 sections, while Ethel realizes with horror that he didn't read the instructions carefully. She confidently states that answering 30% of the exam should be sufficient to pass the entrance requirement. Ethel's sweat drops as he admits to himself that he answered every single question because he simply knew all the answers. He realizes that for a normal 30% passing grade to exist, the test must be designed for specialists rather than generalists. Panic sets in as he wonders what will happen to him since he likely scored far above the intended range. Meanwhile, inside the faculty room, the teachers scream in disbelief as they stare at a score of 958 points. The staff is in an uproar as they review the exam papers, which are covered in perfect circle marks indicating correct answers. The headmaster trembles with shock, demanding to know who the student is and wondering if they cheated since this has never happened before. A teacher identifies the student as Candidate 588, Ethel Alcott, noting he shares the name of the legendary Thunder Emperor. The faculty argues that it must be cheating, but one teacher interrupts to remind them of the boy's practical exam performance. Franz Bauer steps forward to testify, revealing the boy's terrifying abilities demonstrated during the battle royale. The teachers gasp in horror as Bauer reports that Ethel performed a parallel activation of a level 4 spell. Bauer points out that casting a single level 4 spell is already the caliber of an elite instructor, let alone doing it in parallel. The staff realizes that if his practical ability is that high, his written exam score might actually be legitimate. They conclude that he could practically be the second coming of the Emperor of Thunder himself. The headmaster stares at the report, seemingly seeing the image of the legendary figure superimposed on the candidate. A teacher asks for the headmaster's decision on how to handle such an unprecedented student. The headmaster rubs his chin and admits the boy rubs him the wrong way, but decides on a special course of action. Later, the results are posted in the city, drawing a massive crowd of anxious students checking for their numbers. Ethel suggests they split up to search the boards, struggling to see through the sea of people. He scans the lists, looking for his number while navigating the chaotic crowd of celebrating and despairing students. Suddenly, Anastasia tackles him in a hug, screaming "Master!" in a fit of overwhelming joy. She excitedly points to the board, announcing that she has passed and made it into the special class. Ethel congratulates her on being number 589 while the surrounding crowd whispers about the publicly displaying couple. He smiles warmly at her success, noting that she can finally lead the ordinary life of a student she deserves. Anastasia thanks him profusely for his guidance, and Ethel turns his attention back to finding his own result. Confusion sets in as Ethel scans the lists again and realizes his number is missing, despite feeling he did well. Anastasia notices his distress and asks what is wrong as he stares blankly at the board. Ethel admits he cannot find his number anywhere, the reality of potential failure sinking in. He starts spiraling, wondering if they secretly measured his magic compatibility or failed him for being too violent in the practicals. Anastasia furiously declares she will object to the administration, but Ethel stops her to avoid further embarrassment. The crowd's attention shifts to a separate, isolated notice board standing apart from the main lists. The board announces Ethel Alcott as the representative of the special students and first place in the written exam. Anastasia beams with pride, telling him she expected no less than an incredible designation for her master. Ethel laughs awkwardly, worried that being a representative will force him into troublesome responsibilities. Anastasia reads about the benefits of the special class and urges him to enroll immediately, ignoring his hesitation. Walking through the halls, Ethel laments that being a mascot is completely different from the quiet life he wanted. He mourns the loss of his ideal academy life, where he planned to sneak into the library unnoticed. Resigning himself to his fate, he walks through the corridor, feeling he has no right to refuse the position. He suddenly stops in his tracks, his attention caught by a presence in the hallway ahead. A beautiful elven woman walks through the academy grounds, drawing the attention of bystanders with her commanding presence. Ethel freezes in sheer terror, his eyes widening as he recognizes the familiar face from his past life. He desperately tries to deny reality but forces himself to accept that Merlin is inexplicably standing right in front of him. Watching her from a distance, he notes with dread that her appearance hasn't aged a day since he last saw her. Panic sets in as he realizes his current face looks dangerously similar to his previous incarnation, risking immediate exposure. He frantically calculates the disaster that would ensue if the reincarnation of a 4 emperor were revealed in such a public place. Merlin asks to inspect the academy further while Anastasia unknowingly calls out to Ethel at the worst possible moment. Anastasia suddenly stops in her tracks, sensing an overwhelming aura radiating from the approaching elf. Ethel holds his breath as Merlin walks right past them, praying that she simply keeps moving without noticing him. Merlin halts abruptly and turns around, her sharp gaze locking onto them as Ethel tries to convince himself he is safe. To his horror, she abandons all decorum and sprints directly toward them with intense focus. She screams for them to wait, her desperation evident as she closes the distance in a heartbeat. Ethel and Anastasia stand frozen as Merlin skids to a halt right in front of them, staring deeply at Ethel. She stammers and struggles to find her words, her composure cracking as she stares at a ghost from her past. Regaining her resolve, she cuts straight to the chase and demands an answer without any pleasantries. She leans in with burning intensity and asks if he is related to the legendary Emperor of Thunder. Ethel realizes she sensed his magical signature but decides to play dumb to avoid blowing his cover. He swiftly decides that getting kicked out of the academy for a scene is better than having his true identity exposed. Feigning ignorance, he apologizes and claims he has absolutely no idea what she is talking about. Grabbing Anastasia's hand, he shouts that they are late for lunch and sprints away before Merlin can ask another question. Merlin stands alone in the hallway, watching them flee with a mixture of confusion and lingering suspicion. Safely away, Anastasia exclaims in shock that the woman was the famous Merlin-sama and chides Ethel for not knowing. Ethel sighs with relief that Anastasia's ignorance saved him from a deeper interrogation and maintains his lie. Anastasia eagerly offers to introduce him, explaining that Merlin is technically a distant relative of hers. Ethel does the math and realizes that a relation from 10 generations ago makes them practically strangers. He observes Anastasia eating lunch and notes that despite the relation, she is nothing like the intense elf they just met. His mind drifts back to Merlin's intense expression, unable to shake the unease of her sudden appearance. He puzzles over why the headmaster of the prestigious Altina Academy would be visiting a human school like Krone. A wave of dread washes over him as he prays to the gods that she hasn't taken a teaching position here. The scene shifts to the bustling academy grounds as the entrance ceremony begins for the new students. Ethel and Anastasia walk together in their new uniforms, ready to start their life at the academy. The ceremony begins as the headmaster takes the stage to address the gathered freshmen. An elderly mage with a long beard welcomes the students and congratulates them on their acceptance. He addresses the different tiers of students, acknowledging the common, noble, and special classes. He urges them to look past their differences and study sorcery diligently together as peers. The headmaster suddenly announces a special guest, revealing that Merlin has graced them with a visit. Ethel watches in resignation as Merlin takes the stage, realizing his bad luck has followed him here. He frantically plans his next move, relieved she isn't staff but knowing he must avoid her after the ceremony. The headmaster drops a bombshell by calling Ethel Alcott to the stage as the freshman representative. Ethel turns pale as he stands up, locking eyes with a shocked Merlin who instantly recognizes his name. Ethel panics internally, realizing that if his name becomes known here, a certain someone will definitely figure out his identity. Gossip erupts among the students about the special student who destroyed the arena and scored the highest marks in history, while Ethel prays for anonymity. A horde of female students suddenly swarms Ethel, shoving each other to get close to the rumored prodigy. One particular elf girl stares daggers at him through the crowd, her eyes locking onto her target. Ethel freezes, sweat trickling down his face as he senses the impending trouble. The entrance ceremony concludes, but the chaos for Ethel is just beginning as the girl makes her move. The majestic architecture of the academy looms overhead, bearing witness to the students' panic. Ethel realizes their eyes have met and mentally prepares himself for the headache that is about to ensue. The girls bombard him with questions about girlfriends and family, completely ignoring his discomfort. Merlin fumes silently, annoyed that these random girls are crowding the man she suspects is her master. She marches forward and slams a stack of papers onto Ethel's desk, creating a sudden silence. The surrounding male students watch in stunned silence as the mood in the cafeteria shifts instantly. Ethel stares at the hand pressing down on the exam papers, recognizing the authority behind the gesture. Merlin declares she has urgent business with Ethel, causing the other girls to protest her interruption. She shoots them a terrifying glare, and the girls instantly realize they are facing the legendary Merlin-sama. Terrified by her aura, the girls scream apologies and scramble to get away from her wrath. The cafeteria clears out in seconds as the students flee, leaving Ethel alone with the dangerous mage. Watching her command a room, Ethel notes that Merlin has grown much sterner than the girl he knew in the past. She looms over him and asks if she can call him Ethelkin, to which he nervously agrees. Ethel sighs internally, realizing the ship has sailed and he can no longer hide since his name is out. Merlin leans in with a piercing gaze and asks him if he knows the definition of the word reincarnation. Ethel's face goes pale with shock as his worst fear is immediately realized. He recalls that this girl has always been frighteningly perceptive, even back in the old days. Feigning ignorance, he laughs nervously and asks what she means, but Merlin reveals she examined his test results. She displays his score of 958, claiming it looks as if one of the 4 emperors took the exam for mere amusement. Merlin presses on, stating that none of the teachers could comprehend the logic behind his answers. She asks him if he knows why his answers were so incomprehensible to modern mages. She reveals that his solutions were based on magical theories that were completed and perfected 400 years ago. Ethel stares in silence while Anastasia looks back and forth between them, sensing the tension. Merlin demands an explanation for this anomaly, while Ethel realizes he failed to account for the passage of time. She whispers that he is just like him, confirming that his dated knowledge has exposed his connection to the past. Merlin's expression softens as she mentions someone who is very special to her. Ethel looks away, feeling the weight of her emotions and the secret he is keeping. Merlin suddenly apologizes for getting heated, admitting she got carried away thinking he was related to her master. She speculates that he must have a special connection to the legendary Ethel, perhaps even being his reincarnation. She theorizes that he fled from her earlier because he didn't want to face her due to that complicated relationship. Blushing slightly, she whispers that this is her personal surmise regarding his identity. Ethel realizes she has completely figured him out and that there is no point in denying the connection. Merlin looks at him with hope-filled eyes, asking if her deduction about him being him is correct. Ethel closes his eyes and wishes he could just tell her the truth, knowing it would make life so much easier. Whispers ripple through the restaurant as students suspect that one of the 4 emperors might be present at Ethel's table. The surrounding patrons freeze in shock, their eyes wide with fear as they sense the heavy atmosphere. Ethel sighs with exhaustion, insisting that he has no ulterior motives and just wants to pursue sorcery. He attempts to confess the truth to the elf looming over him, stammering as he tries to de-escalate her anger. Merlin leans across the table with a terrifying glare, demanding to know if the rumors about a mistress are true. She grabs him in a fury, prompting Ethel to pivot and feed her a fabrication she would be willing to accept. Thinking quickly, Ethel lies that the Emperor of Thunder had a secret mistress and an illegitimate child. He claims the family lived as hermits to hone their magic, and that the child inherited all the Emperor's knowledge. Merlin screams that it is impossible, but Ethel tackles her to the bench to physically silence her outburst. He whispers the lie that the Emperor died in despair over his lack of talent, shocking Merlin into silence. Overcome with emotion, she pulls him into a suffocating hug, burying his face in her chest to comfort him. She covers his mouth with her hand, warning him strictly not to speak of such sensitive secrets in public. She stares at him with intense scrutiny, asking if Ethelquin is truly the heir who knows these things. Ethel stands his ground and confirms the lie, introducing himself as Ethel Alcott XIII. He internally apologizes to Merlin for the deception, hoping she will accept this story and let the matter slide. A cold sweat runs down his face as he waits for his former disciple to react to his audacious claim. Merlin closes her eyes and lowers her head, seeming to accept his explanation with a solemn expression. She stands up and admits she feels excluded from the secret, but claims she understands the situation. Turning away, she declares that his family is not the only one striving to reach the pinnacle designated by the Emperor. She grips the chair, announcing that she now feels a burning urge to test which of them is the real deal. Spinning around, she throws a mock punch at him, smiling fiercely as she asserts he isn't the only heir to power. Ethel awkwardly changes the subject, asking Merlin what she is actually doing here at the academy. Merlin explains she exists to remind freshmen of the power gap, though she is ordered to eventually lose. She issues a sudden challenge, inviting him to a magic duel at the exemplary battle arena later that afternoon. Ethel freezes in sheer panic, his eyes widening as he realizes the dangerous corner he has painted himself into. He realizes that fighting her will destroy his low profile and that a serious match might actually be the end of him. He frantically considers refusing the match, weighing the embarrassment against the danger of exposure. Gritting his teeth, he struggles to maintain his composure while his mind races for a way out. A realization strikes him, shifting his internal monologue from fear to a spark of curiosity. He admits to himself that deep down, he wants to see exactly how much his disciple Merlin has grown. The scene shifts to the massive outdoor arena, where the entire student body has gathered for the event. Ethel stands calmly on the stage, facing down the imposing figure of Merlin amidst the vast battleground. The announcer's voice booms across the stadium, introducing the special exemplary magic battle to the crowd. He hypes up the match, presenting Headmaster Merlin as the heroine of the demons who will demonstrate the pinnacle of sorcery. The students erupt into cheers, thrilled by the rare opportunity to witness Merlin's legendary magic in person. Female students scream Ethel's name in support, while Anastasia plugs her ears in annoyance at the noise. Ethel accepts the match with a smile, suggesting to Merlin that they start with a basic test of skill. Merlin agrees with a confident smirk, preparing to unleash her power to test him immediately. Dark energy swirls violently around her as she manifests a terrifying spell without a single incantation. Ethel watches in shock as she unleashes a level 6 flare burst, marveling that she cast it entirely without chanting. A massive explosion of magical energy erupts, sending debris flying and tearing through the structure of the arena. Ethel admits he underestimated the exam, realizing that this battle is far more than a simple basic test. He marvels that she instantly blocked his attack with a level 7, perfect wall, proving her defensive mastery. Ethel recognizes her skill in mastering level 6 magic at her age, acknowledging her as a worthy descendant. Merlin proudly declares her identity as the beloved apprentice of the first-generation Ethel, her eyes burning with conviction. Fueled by her pride, she vows to throw his own magic right back at him with interest. Merlin unleashes a flare burst, while proclaiming the superiority of the original student's magic over a mere copycat. Ethel smiles with genuine delight, thrilled to see a level 6 spell trained to such a high degree of accuracy for the first time in this era. Merlin attacks furiously, demanding to know why her enemy is smiling at her lethal assault. Ethel notices with surprise that she has already prepared her next spell before the first one has even faded. A violent explosion of dark fire engulfs the stage, terrifying the watching students who scream in horror. The flames roar across the tiled floor, consuming everything in their path as the smoke billows outward. Merlin explains that mastering the Thunder God techniques allows her to cast high-level magic barrages without chanting. Ethel interrupts her lecture, stating he is done with training and implies he has his own surprises. He launches himself into the air, preparing a counterattack that defies her expectations. Surrounded by a swirl of magical energy, Ethel descends from the sky with a new spell ready in his hand. He unleashes a wave of freezing cold that cuts through the battlefield, targeting Merlin's fiery offense. Merlin gasps in shock as her flames freeze instantly, realizing he anticipated her fire magic and prepared an ice counter. Ethel lands smoothly on the ice-covered ground, his momentum carrying him forward for the next strike. He pivots instantly to continue the assault, not giving her a single second to recover from the surprise. Ethel reveals this technique was originally devised to counter other emperors, proving too fast for her to track. He taunts her to keep up with his speed as he unleashes Evil Frost, leaving Merlin stunned by his rapid spell construction. A blinding explosion of ice magic shatters the area, expanding outward with devastating force. Ethel accelerates even further, praising her reaction time while pushing the pace of the battle to its limit. He unleashes a great ice shard attack, filling the air with deadly projectiles aimed straight at her. Merlin recognizes the level 7 barrage and calls him cheeky, refusing to back down against the onslaught. She desperately casts multiple layers of absolute solidity, perfect wall, to defend against the overwhelming hail of ice. Ethel hurls a massive, spiked ice construct at her, asking her what she thinks of this heavy blow. Merlin stares in horror, realizing that the mana mastery in this particular spell is on a completely different level. Refusing to be mocked, she screams that he shouldn't make light of her and pours her power into defense. The massive ice spike crashes into her barrier with earth-shattering force, sending shockwaves through the arena. Merlin grits her teeth, insisting that her level 7 magic will not lose in terms of mastery. The two powerful spells clash violently, causing the magical barrier to crack under the immense pressure. Merlin struggles to maintain her stance as the impact threatens to sweep her away entirely. Panic sets in as she realizes she is being overwhelmed despite her high-level defense. Ethel declares her technique too weak to stop his icing titan, pointing out the gap in their application of power. The barrier shatters completely, and Merlin cries out in pain as the attack breaks through her defenses. Struck by a sudden sense of déjà vu, Merlin feels like he isn't just fighting her, but correcting her mistakes. A memory of the original Ethel surfaces in her mind, criticizing her technique for being too weak. Merlin freezes in pure shock as the realization of who she is fighting finally begins to dawn on her. Merlin unleashes a ferocious scream as she launches a massive magical assault, challenging Ethel to handle her full power. The attack manifests as a barrage of crystalline shards that shatter the environment and send sharp debris flying in all directions. Ethel gazes up at the incoming destruction with a look of mild surprise on his face. He nimbly dodges the barrage, leaping through the chaos while the spell tears up the ground behind him. Ethel observes the multiple magic circles surrounding her, laughing as he realizes she is casting simultaneous level 7 spells. Merlin strains with the effort of maintaining the complex magic while Ethel watches her struggle with a knowing smile. He lectures her mid-battle, explaining that simultaneous invocation dangerously absorbs the caster's consciousness to the point of distraction. Charging through her defenses, he scolds her for forgetting the ancestral rule to never take her eyes off her opponent. Ethel smashes through the magical construct with a powerful physical strike, shattering the spell's structure. Merlin cries out in shock as the feedback from the broken spell surrounds her in a crackling storm of energy. Ethel grins amidst the chaos, genuinely praising her for the impressive attempt at such high-level magic. He marvels that she is using all 4 limbs to cast level 8 magic simultaneously, a feat that defies normal logic. He notes that ordinary mages would lose consciousness attempting just a 2-way invocation, let alone 4 at once. Merlin roars with determination and unleashes her ultimate attack, daring him to withstand the strike. A colossal bolt of lightning descends from the heavens, crashing down directly onto Ethel's position with godlike force. Ethel looks up at the blinding light with a nostalgic smile, feeling like he is watching an apprentice grow up. He casually reaches out a single hand to intercept the lightning, remarking that the power truly isn't bad. The lightning strikes with cataclysmic force, engulfing the area in a blinding explosion of white light and raw energy. The sheer power of the blast tears through the landscape, obliterating everything in its immediate vicinity. Students and spectators are blown away by the shockwave, screaming in terror as they tumble across the ground. The light fades to reveal the devastation, with residual lightning arcing wildly through the smoke. Merlin stares in absolute horror, unable to comprehend that her strongest spell, Thor's hammer, was completely absorbed. Exhausted and defeated, she loses her ability to fly and plummets helplessly from the sky. Ethel snaps his fingers and casts Magic Cancel to neutralize the remaining energy in the atmosphere. Merlin falls through the air, her body limp and her magic completely spent from the exertion. Ethel leaps into the sky, catching her gently in his arms before she hits the ground. He lands softly with Merlin safely secured, the dust settling around them as the battle concludes. Merlin lies on the ground panting heavily, her body trembling from the immense magical overload. She processes the impossible feat she just witnessed, realizing he cancelled a level 10 spell and absorbed a level 8 attack instantly. Ethel laughs off her previous theory about him being an illegitimate child, finding the idea amusing. Merlin looks up at him with teary eyes, knowing that only one person in the entire world could perform such a miracle. She whispers the name of her former master, Ethel-sama, as the realization fully takes hold. Ethel stands before her, his silhouette overlapping with the memory of the legendary mage she once knew. He smiles down at her with a gentle, familiar expression that confirms everything she suspects. Merlin trembles as she asks him directly if he is the reincarnation of Ethel, needing to hear the truth. Ethel scratches his cheek awkwardly, unable to maintain the charade any longer. He smiles warmly and admits that she has finally figured it out. Merlin breaks down with emotion as Ethel confirms that she, of all people, would know the truth best. He pats her head affectionately, praising her for the surprise attack she managed to pull off at the end. Ethel commends her for her dedication, noting that she clearly hasn't slacked off in her studies for the last 400 years. Merlin trembles with emotion, stammering that the day has finally arrived where she can meet Ethel alive once more. Tears stream down her face as she declares that her 400 years of waiting have been rewarded by his words. Ethel looks down at her with a mix of annoyance and affection, scolding her to stop crying like a foolish child. Merlin wipes her tears and smiles, admitting that in front of him, she thinks she will always remain a child. Their reunion is interrupted as a distant voice screams for a master and a figure approaches rapidly. A breathless girl bent over in exhaustion announces that there is bad news for her master. Ethel stands awkwardly between the two women as the newcomer stares in confusion at the scene. Ethel quickly explains he is taking care of the girl, introducing her as Anastasia, while someone asks if he is keeping a slave. Suddenly, a swarm of students surrounds them, shouting that his magic was incredible and begging to be taught. The crowd presses in closer, asking him to become a professor at their academy and publicize his magic to the scientific society. Ethel grimaces in panic, overwhelmed by the sudden and intense attention from the mob. While Merlin beams that such a reaction is only natural, Ethel grabs the group and sprints away to escape the chaos. As they flee across the broken landscape, Merlin asks why he chose to enroll in this specific academy. Ethel explains that he simply wanted to research magic from the perspective of a student. Merlin accepts his reasoning with a nod, her expression shifting to one of determination. She declares that they must escape the current situation immediately. Ethel asks where they would go, but Merlin only smiles and says she has an idea. Using her magic, Merlin whisks them away, leaving the confused students shouting as the ground cracks beneath their departure. The scene shifts to a distant view of a dark, imposing castle nestled among the trees. The trio walks through a forest path, noting that they have traveled quite far from the academy grounds. They arrive in a clearing, the sunlight filtering through the trees to illuminate their figures. Merlin stops and announces with a smile that they have reached their destination. Ethel looks up in recognition, realizing exactly where Merlin has brought them. He gazes at the massive estate, identifying it as the home he used long ago. A nostalgic smile crosses his face as he realizes Merlin faithfully inherited and watched over the house for 400 years. Merlin gestures for him to follow, prompting him to snap out of his reverie. She announces that as headmaster, she will immediately enroll both him and Anastasia into the Altina Academy of Sorcery. Ethel is shocked by the sudden proposal to enroll them so quickly. Merlin explains that this status will allow him to use the Academy's facilities freely, which piques Ethel's interest. He thanks her enthusiastically, relieved to have such an understanding headmaster supporting his research. Ethel shouts that he is home to his old house, noting that he and Anastasia ended up living there as Merlin's adopted children. The narrative confirms their new cover story as Merlin's apprentices while they wait for the transfer paperwork. Inside the mansion, Ethel's eyes light up with excitement as he enters a specific room. He stands in a massive library, marveling at the collection of his old grimoires. He eagerly pulls books from the shelves, flipping through the pages of his past knowledge. Ethel is touched to find that preservation magic has been cast on every single book to keep them in perfect condition. Realizing Merlin devoted her time to maintaining his knowledge, he feels a deep sense of gratitude for her dedication. His thoughts shift to combat as he remembers a specific sword he wanted to use, now that he is capable of wielding it again. He heads toward the treasury, the dark corridor illuminated by magical lights. Inside the treasury, they are confronted by strangers who call them thieves and warn them to turn around before they get hurt. Ethel politely asks the guardian to move aside, stating he is simply there to retrieve his sword, the lightning splitter. The massive genie looks down with contempt, calling the intruders stinking little thieves for their audacity. The guardian explains that the sword is an SSS-rank treasure once wielded by the legendary Emperor Ethel himself. He scoffs at their arrogance, noting that the blade was seized from the Demon King's Generalissimo and is impossible to find elsewhere. Ethel recalls the terror of that battle, remembering how the sword sliced through his defenses in a panic. The genie warns them to leave immediately, offering to overlook their intrusion as mere curiosity from Merlin's students. He emphasizes that the treasury is strictly forbidden to everyone except Merlin and the late Emperor Ethel. Ethel tries to explain that this rule is exactly why he should be allowed in, but the genie cuts him off. The genie's patience snaps at the boy's casual attitude, threatening to crush him for his lack of respect. Assuming Ethel is merely Merlin's spoiled favorite, the genie prepares to teach the stupid brat a harsh lesson. Ethel stares back with unwavering intensity, his eyes locked on his objective despite the threat. The genie complains about being overworked by that hag, revealing his frustration with his master Merlin. He explains that Merlin is already suspicious of the new Ethel, believing the boy to be incompetent. The guardian accuses the boy of using underhanded means to seize the prestigious name of the emperor. Ignoring the genie's ramblings completely, Ethel coldly asks the location of the lightning splitter. His voice drops to a menacing growl as he demands to know where his sword is hidden. Intrigued by the boy's boldness, the genie decides to humor him and reveal the sword's location. He points a massive finger toward the back of the room, indicating where the blade rests in the darkness. The genie warns that enshrinement magic protects the treasures, ensuring no ordinary thief can touch them. As Ethel walks confidently toward the sword, the genie waits expectantly for the trap to spring. He taunts Ethel that it is futile to try unless he possesses magic power on par with Merlin herself. To the genie's shock, Ethel grips the hilt of the sword without triggering any defensive spells. Light explodes from the scabbard as Ethel draws the blade, swinging it with practiced ease. The protective magic on all the surrounding treasures shatters instantly, leaving the genie gaping in horror. Ethel hums a cheerful tune, delighted to be reunited with his weapon as he tests its balance. The genie trembles in disbelief, realizing the boy has effortlessly dispelled the high-level magic protecting the room. A furious aura fills the room as Merlin appears, her eyes burning with rage at the insults she overheard. She glares daggers at the genie, demanding to know exactly who he was calling a hag. The genie screams in terror as he realizes his master has caught him bad-mouthing her. Merlin's anger vanishes as she spots Ethel holding the sword, surprised by his swordsmanship. She realizes he spoke and acted exactly like the original emperor, dispelling level 8 magic without a chant. The truth finally hits her with undeniable force, shattering her doubts about his identity. Ethel stands calmly with his sword, watching the realization dawn on his former apprentice. The genie cowers in fear, overwhelmed by the terrifying glare directed at him by the sorceress. Realizing his mistake, the genie prostrates himself and begs for forgiveness for not recognizing the true Ethel. Ethel smiles benevolently and tells the terrified spirit that it is fine, showing no hard feelings. He introduces Anastasia and himself as new residents, telling the genie to remember their faces well. Merlin smiles coldly and whispers that if the genie ever calls her a hag again, she will erase him from existence. Ethel sheathes his sword with a click, signaling the end of the chaotic retrieval mission. Peace returns to the estate as the group settles in, the moon shining brightly over their new home. Merlin knocks on the door and politely asks for a moment of Ethel's time regarding a small matter. Ethel invites her in, and the scene shifts to a formal meeting room where Merlin kneels before him. She hesitantly brings up the fact that she recently shared a bath with Anastasia at the large bathhouse. Merlin explains with a serious face that she examined Anastasia's body to see if she was fit to service Ethel at night. Ethel spits out his tea in a violent spray of shock at the sudden and inappropriate revelation. Merlin insists that a top-class mage requires a top-class partner, while Ethel frantically denies any such relationship exists. Unfazed, Merlin declares that as his greatest apprentice, she felt obligated to verify the girl's quality. A steamy flashback reveals Merlin thoroughly inspecting every inch of a humiliated Anastasia's body to ensure she could satisfy her master. Ethel blushes furiously and screams that she has the wrong idea, while Anastasia curls up in shame. Realizing her error, Merlin apologizes for the misunderstanding while Anastasia trembles on the floor. Merlin shifts the topic, noting that during the bath she discovered something concerning. She asks Ethel if he intends to keep Anastasia by his side despite knowing about her unique slave mark. The room falls silent as Ethel calmly takes a sip of his tea and confirms that he does. Merlin stares at him with wide eyes, stunned by his immediate and unwavering answer. She warns him that keeping a slave with that specific mark is no different from carrying a live bomb. Ethel's expression darkens as he snaps that she is beginning to get on his nerves with her warnings. He glares at her with intensity, declaring firmly that the decision is his and his alone to make. Merlin closes her eyes and smiles softly, bowing her head in apology for overstepping her bounds. She accepts his resolve, acknowledging that if it is Ethel's judgment, she will not question it further. Ethel smiles with restored confidence, assuring her that he knows exactly what he is doing. With the matter settled, the paperwork is processed, and their enrollment into the academy is finalized. Ethel and Anastasia button their uniforms, preparing to face the world as official students. The first day of school arrives, and they stand before the imposing gates of the Altina Academy of Sorcery. As they walk through the courtyard, the bustling crowd of students suddenly parts and stares in confusion. Whispers of disbelief ripple through the crowd as students question if their eyes are deceiving them. The demons look at Ethel with open disgust, wondering why an inferior human species is walking among them. Ethel walks forward with his eyes closed, fully aware of the hostility directed at him while Anastasia clings to his arm. He recalls that this territory was taken by demons after the Great War, transforming the human academy into a demon school. Ethel smirks, noting that demons view humans as strange rarities since they have grown up in a demon-only territory. Ignoring the stares, he points out their destination, confirming that they have arrived at their assigned classroom. The heavy double doors creak open as they step inside to face their new classmates. The noise in the room dies down instantly as every demon student turns to scrutinize the new arrivals. Ethel stands tall in the doorway with a nervous Anastasia behind him, facing the silent judgment of the class. A male demon covers his nose and sneers, loudly commenting that the room suddenly reeks of a foul stench. Ethel sighs internally, realizing that his academy life is going to be just as troublesome as he predicted. Despite the immediate hostility, Ethel narrates that he and Anastasia have successfully enrolled thanks to Merlin's guidance. Anastasia flinches as she hears the classmates mocking the idea that a human could ever be good at sorcery. The bully continues his tirade, laughing that the disgusting smell must be exclusive to the human race. Ethel ignores the insults completely and cheerfully asks Anastasia if she would like to find a seat. He walks calmly through the lecture hall while the demon students continue to whisper about the absurdity of a human transfer student. Anastasia trembles with visible anxiety, prompting Ethel to ask what is wrong. An arrogant elf student glares at them while his female companion looks on with scrutiny. Anastasia's expression tightens, her nervousness clearly growing by the second. Ethel asks about her behavior, but she frantically shouts that nothing is the matter at all. The male elf confronts Ethel, demanding to know how he managed to enroll in the school. He walks past them with a swagger, continuing his interrogation about Ethel's entry methods. His hand rests casually on his sword hilt as he prepares to insult the new student. The elf speculates that Ethel must be someone influential among humans to get in. He accuses Ethel of using money to buy an audience with the director and squeeze his way in. The surrounding students whisper among themselves, accepting this explanation for the human's presence. Ethel sweats awkwardly, realizing the elf isn't entirely wrong about the special treatment. The elf turns back, questioning if Ethel thinks he can keep up with the elite curriculum. He sneers down at Ethel, calling him an inferior piece of human trash. Unbothered by the insult, Ethel simply smiles and replies that he will try his best. The elf stares blankly, likely expecting a more volatile reaction to his taunts. The female elf student glares at Ethel with visible disdain and irritation. She explodes in anger, asking if he knows the abysmal passing rates she had to overcome. She lectures him that this academy is reserved for superior species like demons and elves. Furious, she refuses to accept studying alongside an inferior human who can barely use sorcery. Ethel apologizes for the trouble as he takes his seat, trying to de-escalate the situation. The elf girl claims she doesn't discriminate based on race, but notes humans aren't respected there. Glaring intensely, she clarifies that she strictly discriminates based on merit. She advises him to stay out of their sight since he won't be good at sorcery anyway. Ethel listens calmly, noting that the belief in demon superiority hasn't changed in 400 years. He recalls how his brother Fraser had similar struggles, realizing little has changed since the past. The classroom chatter ceases as a voice announces that homeroom is starting. Ethel and Anastasia turn their heads, confused by the sudden arrival of a new figure. The new teacher announces a change in homeroom instructor before introducing the transfer students. Ethel's eyes widen in shock as he recognizes the new teacher is none other than Merlin. The class falls silent as Merlin stands at the podium, commanding the room's attention. Merlin introduces herself as the headmaster and declares she will be their homeroom teacher. She grins mischievously, announcing that she will personally guide them from now on. Ethel sighs with a resigned smile, realizing that this was her plan all along. The students buzz with excitement, debating if the legendary heroine is teaching them due to her prestige. Merlin pauses, noticing a student standing up and looking at her expectantly. The arrogant elf student stands confidently, assuming Merlin heard of his superior reputation. He smirks and asks if she came specifically to instruct a prodigy like himself. The other students whisper in awe, believing that his theory might actually be true. Merlin tilts her head in genuine confusion, staring blankly at the confident student. She bluntly asks who he is, causing the elf to freeze in absolute embarrassment. Abe Marlin stands up and boasts about having the highest marks in the class, introducing himself with arrogance. Merlin dismisses him cold-heartedly, stating sadly that he is not the reason she is here. She points a finger directly at the back of the room and declares that Ethel is the special student she came for. Ethel freezes in panic, sweat pouring down his face as he realizes he has been singled out. The entire classroom erupts in shock, turning their heads to stare at the unsuspecting boy in the back. Confusion and disbelief ripple through the students as they gape at the seemingly ordinary human. Ethel cringes internally, realizing that Merlin's spotlight has just made his life significantly harder. Abe questions Merlin with disbelief, asking if the headmaster really took this role just for a human. Merlin's expression hardens into a glare as she confirms the student's suspicion with silent intensity. Abe stares at Ethel with disdain, unable to believe that this kid is the cause of all the fuss. He scoffs and concludes that Ethel must be the spoiled brood of some major political hotshot. Merlin challenges his assumption, asking icy questions about whether his eyes truly see reality. Abe spreads his arms and mocks the situation, failing to comprehend how else an incompetent human could be there. Merlin retorts that limiting one's perspective with rigid stereotypes is exactly what makes a third-rate sorcerer. She commands the entire class to observe Ethel closely and learn everything they can from him. The students scream in collective disbelief, unable to process the headmaster's absurd instruction. Merlin declares that this experience will surely tear down the racial stereotypes they hold in their minds. Ethel frantically whispers to Merlin, demanding to know what on earth she is trying to achieve. Merlin winks playfully and asks Ethel-sama to please be gentle with the other students. A dark aura of jealousy and rage erupts from the class as they glare at Ethel with glowing eyes. Ethel turns pale and trembles, realizing he has become public enemy number one in an instant. Homeroom ends, leaving Ethel to lament that Merlin has absolutely no intention of letting him live peacefully. As the students disperse, a tall figure approaches Ethel's desk with an intimidating stride. Abe slams his hand down and demands to know who the bloody hell Ethel thinks he is. Ethel curses Merlin internally and tries to play it off by introducing himself as a friendly neighbor. The bullies loom over him, insisting there must be something special for Merlin to describe him that way. Ethel averts his eyes and insists there is really nothing special about him at all. Abe suddenly laughs and claims he understands what is going on, sharing a look with his lackeys. He mentions rumors about Merlin volunteering to teach a sorcery class for special children. He sneers that she has been mentoring a cute boy with extra tender loving care. Abe concludes that Ethel must be the old hag's beloved toy, mocking him openly. Ethel's expression sharpens as he coldly warns them that it isn't nice to call the headmaster a hag. The bully flares up in anger, demanding to know if the bastard has a problem with what he said. Ethel backs down as the bell rings, deciding it is better to avoid getting involved with such a pain. The scene shifts to the next lesson as the second period begins in the lecture hall. The teacher announces that they will use this period to elect class representatives for the academy tournament. Ethel looks up with interest, wondering what exactly an academy tournament entails. The narration explains that 5 representatives are chosen to compete in a monthly friendly tournament. Classes are reshuffled every 4 months based on these metrics, proving the academy is a total meritocracy. Ethel smiles with determination, realizing that everyone is desperate to prove themselves for the sake of their grades. Merlin stands before the class and announces that the position of Mage Knight is still vacant. Ethel decides to sit this one out, knowing his competitive nature causes trouble when he gets heated. Silence fills the room as Merlin asks for volunteers, while Ethel tries to make himself invisible. She encourages them to nominate themselves or others, but Ethel rests his head on the desk. A loud voice suddenly shatters the quiet as a student calls out to the headmaster. A male student stands up and confidently offers his candidacy for the role. Merlin accepts the nomination, acknowledging that Abe's swordsmanship is indeed the best in the class. She asks if anyone else wants to try, clearly disappointed that Ethel is staying silent. Ethel sighs with relief, but freezes when he sees a trembling hand rise from the desk next to him. The entire class turns in unison, their jaws dropping at the unexpected challenger. Anastasia sits trembling in her seat, her hand raised high in the air. Ethel looks at her in utter disbelief, asking if she has lost her mind. Anastasia stammers but firmly declares that she wishes to endorse Ethel-sama for the position. The classroom erupts in shock as the students process the slave nominating the human. Merlin beams with excitement while Ethel looks like he just swallowed a bug. Abe grins maliciously, his eyes locking onto Ethel as things suddenly get interesting. Merlin steps in to mediate, declaring that she can start the selection process immediately. She announces a practice match between Ethel and Abe to determine the Mage Knight. Ethel sweats nervously, wondering how his peaceful life always spirals into chaos. He glances at Anastasia, who refuses to meet his eyes and looks deeply troubled. Ethel realizes that the shy girl would never speak up unless something was seriously wrong. Abe sneers at him, calling him an inferior species and promising to expose his true weakness. The duel begins instantly as Abe lunges forward with a vicious strike. Ethel barely reacts in time, his eyes widening as the blade comes dangerously close. He dodges the follow-up attacks, moving evasively across the stone floor. Abe yells in frustration, demanding that Ethel wield his sword properly instead of just running. The crowd mocks the terrified human, but Ethel is actually analyzing his opponent's psychology. He realizes that Abe is holding back because he doesn't want to look like he's bullying a weakling. Ethel concocts a plan to fight evenly for a while and then dramatically lose the match. He charges forward with his sword drawn, convinced this strategy is the perfect solution. He smiles internally, believing this plan will satisfy everyone's pride and keep his secret safe. Abe roars with fury and swings his massive sword with lethal intent. Their blades collide in a shower of sparks as Ethel intercepts the heavy blow. The demon students cheer wildly for Abe, demanding he crush the human interloper. Ethel decides to execute an obvious feint, expecting Abe to dodge and deliver a counterattack. He baits the trap, watching Abe's eyes to time his defeat perfectly. Instead of playing along, Abe delivers a crushing kick to Ethel's face midair. The spectators scream in horror as Ethel is launched backward by the unexpected hit. Ethel takes the full force of the boot, his head snapping back violently. He crashes to the ground in a heap, stunned that a mere feint kick did so much damage. Abe flies backward from the impact, baffled that a mere feint carried enough force to hurt him significantly. He crashes onto the stone pavement, groaning in agony as the crowd watches in stunned silence. Abe struggles to comprehend the situation, his face contorted in a mix of pain and humiliation. His body finally gives out and he collapses completely, lying motionless on the cold ground. The referee stammers in disbelief before officially declaring Ethel the winner of the match. Whispers erupt among the students as they try to rationalize how the class ace was defeated so easily. Suddenly, a female student shouts that she has figured out the truth behind the confusing duel. She theorizes that Merlin is planning to overhaul the entire Mage Knight curriculum for the academy. She explains that while humans are hopeless with sorcery, they possess superior strength in close-quarters combat. She concludes that Ethel must be an extraordinary swordsman transferred specifically to demonstrate this new doctrine. The students eagerly agree with her deduction, believing Merlin chose their class for this grand experiment. Ethel overhears the wild theory and decides to play along rather than risk standing out strangely. He puts on a knowing face and confirms that Headmaster Merlin probably said something exactly like that. The entire class is awestruck, convinced they have uncovered the secret, while Anastasia watches silently. A long-haired figure touches his face in bewilderment, reacting to the absurdity of the student's conclusion. The scene fades to black, transitioning away from the chaotic aftermath of the duel in the courtyard. Later that evening, Ethel and Anastasia sit at a long dining table in a lavish room served by attendants. Ethel digs into his meal with childlike enthusiasm, savoring the taste of the meat. Anastasia watches him hesitantly, struggling to find the right words to address her master. She asks if he defeated someone powerful today, but Ethel dismisses the victory by claiming his opponent was weak. Changing the subject, she asks what he would do if he encountered a problem that strength alone could not solve. Ethel pauses his meal to consider the profound question, humming thoughtfully as he formulates an answer. He smiles confidently and replies that he would simply try his best to make lemonade out of lemons. Anastasia lowers her gaze, murmuring that such an optimistic response is exactly what she expects from someone powerful. She asks if he would maintain that resolve even if his fate were tragic and inevitable. Ethel declares that he came to the Altina Academy specifically to overcome the inevitable. Anastasia laughs sorrowfully, noting the vast difference between them and praising his incredible nature. She begins to say she shouldn't get involved, but Ethel cuts her off to deny that sentiment immediately. She apologizes, feeling useless because she cannot repay his generosity for enrolling her in the academy. Ethel raises his glass and assures her that she is not a slave and has nothing to worry about. Anastasia insists she cannot remain without being useful, lamenting her inability to serve him properly. In a desperate bid to prove her worth, she suddenly stands up and begins to strip off her clothes. She blushes furiously and offers to become his sex slave if that is the duty he requires of her. Ethel panics and shouts at her to stop, frantically explaining that such things are not needed. He covers his eyes and stammers that being his master isn't what is important to him. Blushing deeply, he admits that he is content simply seeing how she feels and being with her. He turns back to the table and declares that eating together is enough for him. Anastasia pauses, holding her utensil as a genuine smile begins to spread across her face. Tears well up in her eyes as she thanks him, realizing the sincerity of his kindness. She beams with happiness and cheerfully announces that the meat is delicious. A cheerful voice declares that meat cheers anyone up while someone heartily agrees with the sentiment. A stuttering voice struggles to address a master amidst mocking laughter and a command not to cry. The sobbing intensifies as the scene transitions to the exterior of a mansion the following day. Ethel enters the warehouse to find the massive genie weeping loudly in despair. He discovers that the treasure chests have been emptied and several artifacts, including the lightning splitter, were stolen. The genie confesses that he turned a blind eye to the theft simply because the perpetrator was Anastasia. Anastasia sobs an apology while clinging to the genie as Ethel observes the scene with a calm expression. Ethel deduces that her irregular slave mark is a specific variant designed for thievery. He realizes that a secondary command layered beneath her sex slave mark has finally activated. He notes that standard slave contracts forbid commands that are illegal or would cost the slave their life. He explains that dark arts are required to create irregular marks that bypass these fundamental safety rules. Ethel recalls that branding someone with such a mark was considered a criminal act even in his previous life. He approaches the weeping pair and admits he adopted Anastasia, fully expecting this betrayal to happen eventually. He tells the genie that crying will not solve anything and prepares to take action. Merlin is shocked when Ethel casually announces that he intends to solve the problem directly. He declares with absolute confidence that he is going to break the irregular slave mark contract. Merlin frantically warns him that an irregular incantation cannot be cancelled like a simple business deal. Ethel acknowledges he is aware that slave marks are usually divided into labor and sex categories. He explains that common marks are merely binding contracts used to prevent desertion or enforce labor. He clarifies that irregular slave marks operate on a completely different and more dangerous level. He reveals that these specific marks are secured by the power of a contract beast named Kami. Merlin recounts how Kami once decimated an entire country over a broken contract and asks if he plans to oppose such a beast. Ethel ascends the stairs and calmly admits to Merlin that he knows the task will not be easy. She questions why he would go to such extreme lengths for a girl who just betrayed him. Ethel smiles and states he must watch over her until the end because he adopted her just as he adopted Merlin. He expresses his belief that Anastasia is not the kind of person who would betray him without hesitation. He looks upward with a determined expression and vows that he cannot simply leave her alone. Merlin blushes deeply and looks away after hearing his heartfelt declaration of loyalty. She resigns herself with a knowing smile and remarks that he is exactly that kind of man. Ethel reveals he cast tracking magic on the treasures earlier and asks for Anastasia's location. Merlin deduces that Anastasia is likely delivering the stolen booty to her true master nearby. Ethel declares that it is time for them to go and retrieve his Anastasia. Edwards laughs maniacally in his hideout while inspecting the stolen treasures and the lightning splitter. Anastasia trembles in fear and stammers her thanks to her master for his approval. He shouts her name in triumph and praises her for finally doing a job well done. He admits he was surprised that she managed to infiltrate the target as a transfer student. He gloats over possessing the lightning splitter, which was once wielded by the Demon King's family centuries ago. Edwards sneers that his own family's treasures pale in comparison to the power of this artifact. He reaches out a gloved hand towards her while his expression shifts to something more sinister. He sits back with a whip in hand and stares at her with a cold and menacing silence. He glares intensely at Anastasia and asks if she truly understands the situation. He rants about the weapon's immense power and dismisses Ethel as nothing more than inferior scum. Edwards orders Anastasia to persuade Ethel to participate in a practice match with him. She tries to warn him about Ethel's strength, but he cuts her off and demands she stop whimpering. He screams at her in a rage and demands to know if she understands his orders. Anastasia recalls how Edwards refused to listen when she tried to convey the truth about Ethel's power. She hesitates to speak again as she realizes Edwards has no idea how strong Ethel actually is. Edwards looks at her with annoyance until she suddenly interrupts him with a desperate shout. Anastasia begs for confirmation that he will truly stop his schemes after this final task. Edwards stares down at her with a stoic and unreadable expression as she awaits his answer. A maid stands before her seated master in a checkered room, apologizing for her tone when he coldly remarks that she sounds as if she detests serving the port's family. The master, resting on a sofa with a sword in hand, casually confirms her suspicion with a sharp glint in his eye. He notes that with the lightning splitter her older sister stole, the required offering of 5 artifacts has finally been assembled. He explains that this collection represents the fulfillment of the contract that has bound her family to the port's lineage for generations. With a cold satisfaction, he declares that the terms for her specific generation have now been fully met. The maid's face lights up with sheer hope and joy, believing her long servitude has finally come to an end. Her master immediately crushes that hope, sneering that her irregular slave mark is an entirely different matter. He reveals that the mark, planted by her own Branova family to bind elf killers, is permanent and cannot be removed. He cruelly adds that if she were to bear a child, the mark and the cursed cycle would simply pass down to the next generation. Dismissing her until morning to discuss her future treatment, he admits that she at least performed well today. When the maid asks if she is allowed to stay, he graciously grants her permission to remain in the mansion as a reward. His demeanor shifts to sadistic mockery as he points out that she can no longer return to her other master after stealing the lightning splitter. He taunts her further, insisting she accept her reward of staying since she has clearly burned her bridges elsewhere. The maid collapses to her knees in gratitude while internally vomiting, sickened by the thievery reports she has delivered here so many times. She stumbles into the hallway, overwhelmed by the disgust and nausea that assaults her every time she visits this wretched place. Collapsing onto a bed in a guest room, she feels that today is an exceptionally terrible day compared to all the others. Tears stream down her face as the crushing weight of betraying Ephthalsama finally breaks her spirit. She buries her face in her arm, sobbing uncontrollably over the choices she was forced to make. Her mind drifts back to a memory of her big sister, recalling the moment she thought their suffering was finally over. The flashback transports her to 8 years ago, where she returns to a dilapidated home in the countryside. She recalls that she had a sister who was 10 years older than her, a figure looming large in her childhood memory. They emphasizes the age gap and the presence of the sister who defined her early life. Young Tatiana asks why her big sister has to be so mean, unable to understand the harshness directed at her. Her sister snaps back with venom, blaming Tatiana for taking their mother away and telling her that nobody wants her there. As their father Ivan intervenes to stop Anastasia's cruelty, the narration reveals that their mother died giving birth to Tatiana. Anastasia coldly hands a bag of money to their father, instructing him to add the meager amount to the family fund. Ivan clutches the coins and tearfully apologizes to Tatiana, lamenting how far their noble lineage has fallen. Anastasia scoffs at the state of their home, noting it has been vacant for half a year and asking if that is all the father has to say. Young Tatiana glares at her sister, furious that Anastasia wears expensive clothes while playing around instead of helping. She screams at Anastasia to leave the village if she hates it so much, insisting they would be fine without her. Tatiana lashes out in childish anger, yelling that her sister could have just stayed away if she hated being home. The narration reflects on how she viewed her sister as a heartless person who abandoned the family and refused to tend the fields. Tears stream down the young girl's face as she screams at her retreating sister that she hates her. Anastasia pauses and glances back with a sad smile, simply acknowledging the hatred before turning away. As Tatiana yells that she never needs to come home again, Anastasia walks away, leaving the young girl confused by that strange smile. A close-up reveals the slave mark on Anastasia's hand as she touches her cheek, hiding her true burden from her little sister. Young Tatiana watches her leave, noting that her sister's eyes looked vaguely lonely in that final moment. 5 years pass, and the fields are shown being worked by the remaining family members as time moves on. The sudden sound of carriage wheels clattering against the ground breaks the silence of the rural life. Tatiana, now older and working the fields with her father, looks up in surprise as a carriage approaches their land. The scene opens on a dark memory, the air thick with tension and unspoken dread. A sudden impact shatters the silence, sending shockwaves through the corridor. Debris scatters across the floor, creating a chaotic barrier of dust and confusion. Anastasia flinches as the violent tremors subside, her heart pounding in her chest. The dust begins to settle, revealing the aftermath of a destructive force. She pushes through the wreckage, desperate to find the source of the commotion. Anastasia screams her sister's name, her voice cracking with terrified desperation. She rushes to Tatiana's side, frantically asking the injured girl what happened to her. Anastasia freezes in shock, her mind unable to comprehend the bloody scene before her. Her father stands coldly before Shapiro, the head of the Port's family, and a young Abe. He callously offers Anastasia to them, identifying her as his second daughter. The man urges them to work her hard in Tatiana's place, discarding her without a second thought. Young Abe watches the transaction with a bored expression, remarking on the father's harshness. Shapiro ignores the sentiment and orders the immediate commencement of the inheritance ceremony. Anastasia screams in agony as they force her to stay still for the ritual. She stares in horror, realizing they are using her sister's own hand to facilitate the transfer. Shapiro explains that the mark being carved into her is the irregular slave brand. He reveals that Tatiana failed her contract, so Anastasia must now serve as her replacement. The curse takes hold instantly, binding her fate to the Port's family from this moment on. Shapiro states that the terms of her servitude are brutally simple and non-negotiable. The contract demands 5 rare artifacts be stolen and offered to the Port's family every generation. He adds that this cursed obligation will pass down to her descendants for all eternity. Her mission is to infiltrate the homes of nobles as a slave and steal these magical items. He notes that Tatiana only secured 3 artifacts, leaving Anastasia to find the remaining 2. Shapiro warns that failure or death is no longer an acceptable excuse for their lineage. Anastasia trembles violently, the weight of the impossible task crushing her spirit. A vision of Tatiana appears, tearfully apologizing for leaving this burden to her little sister. Anastasia realizes with a sinking heart that this was the moment she understood everything. She recalls that 3 centuries ago, the Branova ancestors waged a war of plunder against the Ports. The greedy Branova clan was defeated by the elite mage knights of the Port's family. As punishment, the survivors were forced into cursed contracts via the irregular slave mark. Tatiana knew the entire dark history and chose to shoulder the criminal lineage's curse alone. She realizes Tatiana deliberately acted cold to make Anastasia hate her and sever their bond. Anastasia weeps, understanding that her sister tried to protect her from the pain of the truth. The memory overwhelms her, tears streaming down her face as the reality sets in. She curses her own foolishness, realizing how deeply her sister actually loved her. Sobs rack her body as she mourns the sister she misunderstood for so long. The weight of the sacrifice breaks her heart, leaving her alone with the curse. The flashback ends, leaving Anastasia resolved to carry the burden her sister left behind. Anastasia weeps over Ethel's sleeping form and apologizes profusely for never noticing her big sister's hidden feelings. She sits up in bed and covers her face as the weight of her grief and guilt overwhelms her in the quiet room. She reflects that 3 years have passed since her sister sacrificed her life to gather the artifacts, counting the ones she just stole. With a resolved expression, she tells herself that the contract terms are finally fulfilled and they will be freed. She despairs that while the contract prevents suicide, she plans to end the cursed cycle by never producing descendants. Edwards violently wakes her from her thoughts, slamming his fist and demanding to know if she is conscious. The scene shifts to a tea table where Edwards dismissively thanks her and tells her she may leave, confusing her greatly. He coldly reminds her that the requirement was actually 5 artifacts, contradicting her belief that the task was finished. Anastasia protests in shock, insisting that this contradicts what they were told before regarding the quota. Edward sips his tea and smugly retorts that his father says she has no choice but to obey regardless of the fairness. He stares her down and demands she bring the lightning splitter, refusing to let someone of her caliber stop now. Anastasia freezes in horror as the realization of his betrayal washes over her face. He outlines a new hellish contract requiring her to breed with men they choose and engrave the slave mark onto her children. He promises that only after offering the remaining 3 artifacts will they actually set her free. Anastasia stammers in disbelief, asking if her older sister died in vain while believing she was fulfilling her quota for freedom. She clutches her chest and desperately asks if her sister's sacrifice and belief meant nothing to him. Tears stream down her face as she demands to know what those feelings mean to him. Edwards leans back and callously declares that he does not give a total rat's ass about her sister's feelings. Anastasia stares blankly as he confirms her worst fears with a cruel smile. He decides to twist the knife further by revealing the truth about the foundation of their servitude. He begins to recount the story of the territorial plunder war that allegedly started everything. A darkened visual of the family history lingers on the screen as a grim reminder of the past. Edwards reveals the war was a setup by their ancestors to enslave the Demon King's relatives for generations, not a punishment for a crime. Anastasia weeps in confusion, struggling to comprehend that the history she knew was the complete opposite of the truth. She realizes with horror that her family has been deceived since the very beginning of their servitude. Edward sneers and admits that watching slaves react to this devastating truth is bloody entertaining. He laughs maniacally and mocks her by revealing that her older sister made the exact same despairing face. Anastasia stands frozen in shock, her mind completely broken by the revelation. She mumbles an excuse and stumbles out of the room, looking utterly defeated. Edwards bursts into laughter, assuming she fled because she simply could not accept the harsh reality. He gloats that she is doomed to return to him every 6 months as long as she bears the irregular slave mark. He shouts after her that escape is impossible no matter where she goes and continues his deranged laughter. The scene transitions to the dark and quiet city streets where Anastasia wanders alone. She walks with a vacant expression, completely numb to her surroundings. A group of rough-looking men spots her walking alone and begins to approach her with ill intent. They call out to her, jeering that it is careless for a girl to be out alone so late at night. One of the thugs lifts her skirt and excitedly identifies her as a sex slave upon seeing the mark on her thigh. They surround her and lewdly suggest she play with them for free since she is a professional. The leader grabs her face and insists they will let her go after they have their fun. They drag the unresponsive Anastasia into a nearby alleyway to do something nice with her. A group of thugs surrounds Anastasia in a dark alley, sneering that while the world is filled with irrational malice, she is habitually diabolical herself. Anastasia stands frozen in despair, realizing she can neither die nor flee because of the cursed irregular slave mark that binds her. The men begin to tear at her clothes, leering that they will strip her right there regardless of the time or place. A terrifying vision of the curse manifests in her mind, declaring with a jagged grin that her condition will never change. As she is assaulted, Anastasia dissociates from the trauma, telling herself that she no longer cares how anything ends up. Tears stream down her face as she closes her eyes, resigning herself to the belief that this world is nothing but pure darkness. Suddenly, Ethel bursts onto the scene with explosive speed, instantly disrupting the group's assault. He delivers a devastating punch to the face of the largest attacker, sending shockwaves through the alley. Without pausing, he pivots and launches a powerful kick that sends another thug flying backward. Ethel continues his rampage, smashing his boot into a thug's face with brutal precision. The attackers are thrown into chaos, shouting in confusion as Ethel decimates their ranks with overwhelming force. He grips an enemy by the head and slams him down, moving faster than they can react. Bodies fly through the air as Ethel clears the space around Anastasia, standing victorious amidst the defeated thugs. Glaring at the remaining conscious enemies, he declares with cold fury that the girl is his companion. Anastasia looks up from the ground in utter disbelief, stammering as she recognizes her master. The beaten thugs groan in pain and confusion, asking what the hell just happened to them all of a sudden. Ethel commands them to get out of his sight, causing them to shriek in terror and scramble away. As the thugs flee into the night, Ethel stands silently before Anastasia, who cowers and whispers an apology. He turns to face her, simply saying her name, to which she nervously responds. He sternly asks why she took the lightning splitter and left without saying a single word to him. Anastasia falls to her knees in the dirt, explaining that she did it because of the irregular slave mark she bears. Ethel questions why she never told him about the irregular slave mark in the first place. She hesitates, struggling to find the words to explain her silence and her burden. She reveals that the irregular slave mark engraved on her cannot be removed no matter what she does. Anastasia explains that even if she told him, the mark is an irrevocable act sealed by the powers of the gods themselves. Breaking down in tears, she cries that the slave contract is absolute and there is nothing one person can do about it. Ethel stares at her blankly and simply asks, "So what?" leaving her stunned by his indifference to the curse. He leans in with intense confidence, demanding to know who she thinks he is. With a smirk, he boldly declares his name is Ethel Alcott, implying that normal rules do not apply to him. He asks her what exactly she has been seeing whenever she looks at him all this time. The scene shifts to a mansion where a noble comments that he expects nothing less in terms of quality from the Port's family. The noble examines the blade with a jeweler's loupe, exclaiming that it is a magnificent sword worthy of being a national treasure. Ethel, disguised and sitting comfortably, remarks that as nobles of the highest rank, such quality is only natural. He draws the sword slightly, emphasizing that it is a significantly precious artifact. Leaning forward with a predatory smile, Ethel begins the negotiation by saying, "And so?" He stares directly at the noble and asks bluntly how much he is willing to offer for it. The flustered noble frantically calculates, eventually shouting out an offer of 5,000 gold coins. Ethel grins amidst a backdrop of imaginary coins, noting that 5,000 is not a bad price at all. The noble admits he doesn't have that much gold on hand today but promises to return, and they strike a deal. Ethel graciously invites the noble to help himself to the cuisine, satisfied that the transaction is settled. Abe gloats maniacally, revealing that there are still 5 more cursed items needed to satisfy the debt. He approaches the mansion with a twisted grin, muttering about how irresistible the situation has become. Anastasia stands frozen in silence, her head bowed and her body trembling with palpable fear. Abe sneers at her pitiful state, letting out a mocking scoff as he towers over her. He taunts her for returning so quickly, asking if she has finally accepted the reality of her inescapable fate. Anastasia struggles to speak, her voice trembling as she stammers out a desperate plea. She begs him to return the stolen item, but Abe feigns deafness and coldly claims he cannot hear her. With tears in her eyes, Anastasia explains that the sword belongs to Ethel and demands its return. Abe leans in with a cruel smile, pretending not to understand as the scene flashes back to a few hours earlier. Ethel calmly nods, telling Anastasia that he has grasped the gist of her complicated situation. He casually announces that he will simply go and retrieve the lightning splitter himself. The memory shifts to Abe screaming abuse at Anastasia, demanding to know what the hell she is doing. Back in the flashback, Anastasia looks at Ethel with teary eyes, asking if he is not angry with her. Ethel turns back with a confused expression, genuinely puzzled by the concept of being angry at her. Anastasia confesses with guilt that she stole his sword and betrayed his trust, expecting punishment. Ethel simply asks if she performed the action because she genuinely wanted to do it. Anastasia hesitates, stammering that it wasn't a desire but rather a compulsion she couldn't control. She explains that as a branded slave, she possesses no free will and cannot escape the power of the mark. Ethel challenges her fatalistic view, wondering aloud if that absolute lack of agency is actually true. He points out that her sister managed to resist the mark to protect her, proving it was an act of her own will. Anastasia gasps, her eyes widening as the weight of his words shatters her long-held belief. The realization strikes her like a physical blow, leaving her stunned and speechless in the street. Ethel continues to speak gently, highlighting the strength of her older sister's will during that tragic time. A vision of her sister protecting her flashes through her mind, confirming the truth she had been blind to. Tears well up in Anastasia's eyes as she finally accepts that her sister's love was stronger than the curse. She drops to her knees on the cobblestones, overwhelmed by the revelation while Ethel watches patiently. Anastasia weeps, admitting that her sister was not completely out of control as she had forced herself to believe. She realizes she had been running away from her fate and despising herself, while her sister had fought bravely. Wiping her tears, she looks up at Ethel and acknowledges her mistake with a newfound sense of clarity. Ethel recalls his own master's teachings, explaining that true freedom is the ability to say no to things you dislike. He declares that having one's own will is essential, and she should be able to reject what she hates. Ethel smiles warmly, satisfied that he has finally passed on the lesson he once learned. The scene returns to the present confrontation where Anastasia recalls asking Ethel for a specific request. In a shocking display of defiance, Anastasia bites down hard on Abe's arm to stop him from leaving. Abe stares at her in disbelief, daring her to repeat her insolent demand one more time. Anastasia refuses to let go, screaming through clenched teeth for him to give back Ethel's sword. Abe looks at her with a mix of fury and shock, unable to comprehend that she is ordering him. He leans in close, threatening her with the brutal consequences of a slave opposing their master. He vividly describes the horrific future of forced breeding and abandonment that awaits her for this rebellion. Anastasia glares back with intense determination, refusing to back down despite the terrifying threat. Edwards chokes Anastasia while mocking her defiant expression and noting that she still seems unsatisfied. She grits her teeth and internally screams that she will absolutely not run away anymore. Anastasia endures the choking and resolves that she must not run, even when Edwards asks if she wants to die. She shouts that she will no longer obey any of them, severing her compliance. Edwards laughs at her resolve and wonders what that inferior human told her to give her such false hope. He swings his sword at her in a vicious arc intended to cut her down. Anastasia is knocked back by the blow, but she glares up at him without fear. She asks so what if she believes in a human, causing Edwards to look at her like she is a complete moron. He strikes her again with the flat of his blade, sending her crashing to the ground in pain. Edwards steps over her and asks if she is stupid enough to think the slave mark curse could be lifted. He looks down at her with a sneer of absolute superiority and disgust. He kicks her body across the courtyard and demands to know how long she plans to keep up this charade. Anastasia coughs in the dirt as Edwards declares he will carefully teach her body who its master really is. He raises his sword high with a twisted grin, ready to inflict severe punishment. He stomps on her to hold her in place, relishing her helplessness. Edwards taunts her by saying he will stop just before she dies so the suffering lasts longer. He swings his blade down to shave off her face while she freezes in terror. Anastasia screams in horror as the weapon descends toward her. She squeezes her eyes shut and prepares for the pain. A metallic clang rings out as Ethel intervenes and tells her she has done well. Anastasia recalls begging him earlier to let her handle this herself so she could atone. She remembers insisting that she must personally make up for her past mistakes. She had pleaded with him not to intervene no matter what happened to her. Ethel stands before her now and gently tells her that she has already atoned enough. Tears spill from her eyes as she accepts his help and whispers a quiet apology. Edward stares in shock and rage at the inferior being who dared to stop his sword. He mocks Ethel for haphazardly following the girl into enemy territory. Edwards grins maniacally and decides it is perfect timing to chop up the master alongside the slave. Ethel dodges the attack and moves inside Edward's guard with terrifying speed. He winds up a punch and coldly warns the elf not to touch his Anastasia. Ethel slams his fist into Edward's face with enough force to distort his features and send him flying. Edwards is launched backward through the air, completely overwhelmed by the blow. He crashes through the garden walls and tumbles across the ground in a cloud of dust. Ethel stands calmly with Anastasia while Edwards lies broken in the distance. Edwards stumbles out of the debris, looking disheveled and utterly confused. He stammers in disbelief that an inferior being managed to punch him not once but twice. He screams in humiliation about his glorious self being touched by filth. Edwards regains his arrogance and demands to know if they realize where they are. He declares that they are in the territory of the Port's family of demon nobles. He summons his 300 guards and announces that the trespassers will be obliterated. The panicked noble screams frantically for his guards, his composure completely shattered by the sudden turn of events. A massive army of armed guards pours out of the mansion to confront Ethel and Anastasia, filling the courtyard. The guards stare down their targets with menacing grins, while Anastasia trembles in fear at the overwhelming numbers. The noble boasts that these guards are the cherry-picked elite of sorcery and martial arts, gathered through the power of his money. He confidently orders his paid elites to eradicate the intruder, believing Ethel stands no chance. Ethel calmly raises his hand to cast a spell, causing both the noble and Anastasia to react with shock. With a stoic expression, Ethel simply declares that he is going to blow them all away. The noble mocks him, laughing at the idea of an inferior human firing magic and confusing level 7 for level 1. Ethel ignores the taunts and activates his magic, generating multiple complex magical circles around his arm. The noble's eyes widen in sheer terror as he finally realizes the devastating scale of the magic being unleashed. A massive vortex of destruction erupts, picking up the elite guards and tossing them helplessly into the air like ragdolls. The shockwave tears through the courtyard and slams into the mansion, ripping the structure apart with overwhelming force. Debris flies everywhere as the mansion is completely demolished, crumbling under the pressure of Ethel's attack. The noble watches in horror as his home is reduced to rubble, stammering out a broken cry for his mansion. Screams of pain echo through the dust as the guards are decimated by the relentless spell. Ethel stands amidst the falling debris, his clothes whipping in the wind as the destruction settles around him. The last of the guards are flung into the distance, leaving nothing but a leveled wasteland in their wake. The noble lies broken on the ground, struggling to comprehend how someone could dare to do something like this to him. He vomits blood and screams in agony, his pride and his body utterly crushed. Ethel surveys the flattened landscape and quietly calls out to Anastasia, who sits stunned amidst the ruin. He offers a sincere apology to her for the destruction he has caused. Looking over the empty field, Ethel asks if she feels a little better knowing this was originally her ancestral land. Anastasia tears up and thanks her master, overwhelmed by his gesture to reclaim her home. She smiles through her tears, expressing her deep gratitude as Ethel looks on gently. The battered noble interrupts their moment, spitefully reminding Ethel that the girl is still a slave. He sneers that as long as she bears the irregular slave mark, she will never attain true freedom. Anastasia's expression darkens with fear as the reality of the cursed mark on her body comes back to haunt her. Ethel dismisses the threat, telling Anastasia to rest assured if that is the only issue. He calmly announces that he intends to forcefully break the curse right now. The noble laughs in disbelief, asking if Ethel even knows how a slave contract works. He warns that a godlike contractual beast will appear to punish anyone who tries to break such a pact. Ethel simply acknowledges the information and calls for Merlin, confirming that the stolen items were indeed sold off. Merlin steps forward and reports her investigation findings, citing dark rumors, mafia relations, and narcotics smuggling. She apologizes to Student Abe for the trouble, while Ethel casually notes he blew the enemies away. Merlin looks down at the defeated noble and coldly declares that he is hereby expelled from her academy. The noble lies speechless and broken, his face contorted in shock at losing his status along with his home. Ethel declares that the main event is beginning now, deciding they are done wasting time with the noble. Anastasia is confused by the phrase, main event, but Ethel points forward and confirms it is starting right now. She stares in disbelief, realizing he is serious about breaking the curse by force despite the impossible odds. Anastasia panics internally, fearing that a human cannot possibly handle a magical contract woven into the fabric of society. Merlin looks at the group with a serious expression, warning that forcefully breaking the contract would typically require a miracle. She smiles confidently, reminding them that they have the full support of both herself and Ethel. Merlin clarifies that the outcome of this endeavor is not some vague miracle they need to pray for. She leans in with a smirk, declaring that their success is actually an absolute certainty. Merlin stares intensely at Anastasia, asking if the young elf truly understands the implication of her words. A montage of Ethel's past battles flashes by, showcasing the overwhelming power that makes him unique. Merlin reasons that if they are truly going to face a god, there is only one person capable of victory. She declares that in this entire world, Ethel is the only master capable of beating a deity. Ethel waves casually to Anastasia, prompting her to jump in surprise and shout a joyous affirmation. He turns to her and formally requests her help, announcing that they are preparing to break the curse. Anastasia nods vigorously with tears in her eyes, beaming with pure happiness as she accepts his request. Ethel declares that they will now forcefully tear off the irregular slave mark and take down a god.